So on a three, two, one. So we are live now. You can start. Over to you.
Dear doctors, good evening and greetings from Lupin Respira Specialty Care Team. Dear doctors, thanks for taking out time and being present today in this hybrid scientific ISP meet pan India. We have connected 4 zones across the country. We have 4 zonal centers in Delhi, Cochin, Mumbai, and Kolkata. We in Lupin Respira Specialty Care Team always strive for scientific dissemination of quality knowledge where we upgrade practice of our esteemed HCPs like you all. In similar breath, today, this platform, we are reinforcing our commitment towards our objective to further upgrade and augment the knowledge of HCPs on the unique benefits of Formoterol Fluticasone in OAD management. Respira Specialty Care Team from Lupin has also been catalyst in fostering scientific and advanced medical knowledge by partnering with leading HCPs and medical associations. We are also a forward-looking organization who believes in bringing innovation in patient treatment and creating a conducive ecosystem. I would like to conclude by thanking you all and looking forward for your active participation in today's event. Before we take this scientific session forward, I would like to call upon our mentor of respiratory vertical, under whose guidance and aegis this scientific program is feasible, Mr. Hirak Bose sir. Hirak Bose sir is Senior Vice President, Sales and Marketing of Respiratory Vertical. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shikhar. A warm good evening to all the doctors. It's really an honor and a pleasure to welcome you all to this ISP Mentor Connect meeting. We are fortunate to have you all together, both physically as well as virtually, connected across India. And today, I'm really privileged to have my friend, who is also an excellent guide to all of us in terms of academia, Dr. Agam Bora. Further, we have with us Dr. John Ogney from Scotland, who will be sharing his experience. And also, we have Dr. Rajesh Venkat, Dr. Rahul Sharma, Dr. Arup Haldar, and Dr. Abhay Bansal. Before going into the academics, I would like to take you through some highlights about Lupin. So Lupin was founded by our founder, Dr. Deshbandhu Gupta. And during that time also, with few other leaders of his generation, he thought how India can be the pharmacy of the world. And he's always remembered by us as good ancestor. Next. Lupin today, as we see, has a market cap of $4 billion and the revenue of $2.2 billion. If I have to talk about the EBITDA is $3.11 million. Coming to the global standings, Lupin is the 10th largest generic company. In India, it is the 6th largest Indian pharma. And in US, it is the 3rd largest in US by prescriptions. Coming to the skew of our total revenue across the world, North America contributes to 36%, India contributes 38%, EMA contributes 9%, growth markets 9%, rest of the world 2%, and in API also it contributes 6%. We have across the world 20,500 global employees. Products are sold in more than 100 countries, and we have a unit capacity of 30 billion plus. We have 12 manufacturing plants across the globe and 7 R&D sites. Next. If I have to look into the 15 sites we have, 12 of them, the factories are US FDA inspected sites, and our range of capabilities are from API to inhalation formulation, including tablets, capsules, liquid, injectables, dermatologicals, and ophthalmics. In the R&D sites, we have around 444 US ANADAs and 292 has been approved. And we also have 51 pending US first to file ANADAs. We have secured a total of 36 patents in the financial year 21. Next. Awards and accolades. We have seen many awards and accolades, and among that, our CEO Vinita Gupta has been named among the most powerful women in business in India, 7th by Fortune India, and included among the India's 20 most influential women in healthcare by Business World. We have been also awarded Master of Risk in Pharma Healthcare at India Risk Management Award, 7th edition by CNBC. Lupin has been ranked #1 in biotech and pharma and among the top 50 large organizations in the list of top 100 great place to work for 1920. Lupin also has been named Best Researchers of the Year at the ET World India Pharma Awards. Next. Coming to the Indian business, at a glance, if you had to see, we are ranked 6th. Our market share in the entire Indian pharma market is 3.67% and is the latest MAT August data. We have a growth which is much more than the IPM. IPM grows at 10.2. We are growing at 10.7. And we have 8 products among the top 300 products in the IPM. Next. Therapy-wise contribution, if we have to discuss about, cardio leads by 21% and diabetes also at 22%, and respiratory is ranked 3 within our organization at 14%. And rest of the other therapy areas contribute to the total skew. Next. Now, in chronic and acute, in chronic segment, we have ranked 4th consistently over a period of last 5 years. In cardio, we have retained our rank at #3 and on the verge of moving ahead. In anti-diabetic, we have moved from 4th to 3rd. And in respiratory, also from 3rd to 2nd position in the Indian pharma market. Next. In India, we have a strong field force of 6067 ground warriors at the marketplace and area managers 1352, regional managers 378, sales managers 93, and national sales managers 14. And we cover in and out of the India. Next. Now, distribution has been one of our pivotal areas where we have been very, very strong. We have 7 central warehouses, 27 state distribution centers, and 4,000 plus wholesalers. And we are our products are available in more than 7 lakh pharmacies across India. And we have cold chain capabilities of marketing all the products which require cold chain capabilities. Next. Coming to the respiratory franchise, in the last 4 years or 5 years, we have moved from 572 crores to 914 crores. And our objective is to, by 27, go to 2,000 crores. Next. We have around more than 1,000 plus people working at the ground level in the respiratory specialty area. Next. And we are the 2nd largest respiratory major with a market share of 11.37%. We have a portfolio spanning 4 therapeutic areas of respiratory practice. We have a reach over more than 60,000 HCPs across India. In the inhalation, which is the backbone of respiratory, we have 20.1% market share. We have 2nd largest presence in the pediatric respiratory market also. And in the Indaglyco COPD segment, we have 66.2% market share. We have strong track record of building mega brands in the respiratory segment. And we are the only Indian pharma to have developed bot for patients in respiratory therapy area called ANIA. Before, to take the things ahead, I'll request Dr. Raunak to lead this meeting from here. Thank you very much. Dr. Raunak?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Hirak. So once again, very good evening to all the respected dignitaries in Mumbai, Kolkata, Delhi, Cochin, and Pan-India across various platforms who have joined. Thank you all for joining. We welcome you all to this great meeting on Mentor Konnect, unveiling the unique benefits of Formoterol Fluticasone in OAD management. To take forward the meeting, we would like to invite and introduce Professor Dr. Agam Vora as our chief moderator for this meeting. Dr. Agam Vora, as we know, he's a leading clinician, academician, teacher, and is contributing greatly to various societies and foundations in respiratory medicine. Dr. Agam Vora is currently working as chest physician and in charge of Vora Clinic, Borivali West. He is fellow FCCP, FRCP, ICP, FGSI, and so on. He was ex-assistant honorary Department of Chest and TB, Dr. R.N. Koper, Municipal General Hospital, Mumbai. He has worked as ex-assistant professor, Department of Chest and TB, KJ Somaiya Medical Hospital, Mumbai. He has been working as assistant editor of JP India. He is general secretary of Association of Physicians of India, Academy of Advanced Medical Education. He is the past president of Geriatric Society of India. He is a trustee of Malad Medical Association, and he is editorial board member of Chest India. Professor Vora has been recipient of multiple national orations, awards, and have delivered more than 650 guest lectures. So before we go ahead, I would also invite all the participant audience to take active part in this meeting. You can post your questions in Q&A. And without wasting further time, I would humbly invite Dr. Agam Vora, sir, to take forward the meeting proceedings. Over to you, Dr. Agam Vora, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Raunak, for those lovely words of introduction. And thank you, everybody. Credit to my poor time management and thanks to Bombay traffic that I'm also forced to take use of this technology and I'm connecting to you virtually. I had all the plans to be there on time, but my apologies. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Hello, welcome, Padaro, Swagatam, Kushamadi, Khamma Gani. How many languages do I use? We have people not only from states of India, but also from various neighboring countries, as I'm told. Even if I say just welcome in all languages that we have delegates here, it would be more than 26 languages, I believe. And that's the fun of these hybrid meetings. Though it lacks physical contact, though it lacks handshake, nice hug, or maybe a charan sparsh to seniors, some long chat over dinners and jokes with friends. But virtual meeting has its own charm. Trust me, it lets you connect beyond boundaries. You have people from length and breadth of India, the neighbors, and speaker from 7 oceans beyond. You do not go to CMEs, but CMEs come to you. You may be at your clinic, at your home, in car like I am, or in front of desktop or laptop may be there on your lap. It may be your phone, and best of the meetings just unfolds in front of you. Thanks to the technology, as I'm told, we already have about 1,200 doctors on this platform, and we expect about another 2,000 to join by this event as the event unfolds. We have international speaker going to be talking to us about secrets of combination therapy. And then we have national flavor to it with 4 different corners participating. And yes, me, Agam Vora, is going to be your host for today evening. So here, I will be soon sitting at Novotel, Mumbai with a few doctors in front of me. And we will have international speaker right from Scotland, Dr. John Hugne, and national experts that we have Rajesh from Kochi, Avya from Mumbai, Dr. Sharma from Noida, and Anup Bhai from Kolkata. And discussion is about my favorite topic, asthma. My life was very simple, trust me, with salbutamol and oral prednisolone. But then there was sudden revolution in the treatment of asthma. Our understanding changed from only spasm to all inflammation. And simple SOS treatment changed to long-term treatment, maybe lifelong treatment. And then came the most interesting part of the discussion, and that is combination of beta agonist and steroids. And then came which beta agonist and which steroid. Trust me, till the time Laila meets Majnu, history is not created. History is created only when Radha meets Krishna. And then this particular combination. So the history is created when one of the fantastic beta agonists join hands with one of the fantastic steroids that we know. We knew about LABA, we knew about ultra LABA, we know about various steroids. But when this Formoterol met Fluticasone, a history was created. So we have no doubt in about minds about this Formoterol. One of the very potent long-acting beta agonist. It starts its action within minutes and has continued its effect for more than 12 hours. We have used budesonide for a longer time, but trust me, we all are convinced in our mind that you have this fluticasone, which has emerged as real good, potent anti-inflammatory drugs. And I was reading somewhere, it has got 2,000 times more potency, glucocorticoid potency as compared to budesonide. And it is more lipophilic, making it longer standing. And then came studies after studies, and it confused us more. We were spoiled for choices. So, I was in one of the meetings last time, and it reminds me of that dialogue. Hirak, you know that movie where Sunny Deol is talking, and he says, "Tariq pe tariq, tariq pe tariq, tariq pe tariq milti hai sarkar, or no judge, your honor, but yeah, insaf nahi milta."
Yes, yes.
And when I was thinking about, and then when I was thinking about these trials, I realized that we have trial per trial. We have trial, we have national trial, we have international trial, but we don't know what to do in real life. And hence, to give us this answer, when I was just talking about this problem, Dr. John came to my rescue and he said, I am going to be there. I will clear all your doubts, whatever myths, whatever concepts you need clarity. And there he is for next 1.5 hours with us to solve all these queries. So friends, we have a power pack program for next 2 hours. You're going to be glued to your chairs. Put your phone on silent mode. Ask your secretary not to disturb you for next 120 minutes. Ask your wife, spouse, to watch those bore serials on TV alone. Tell your kids to order food online as you're not going to be taking them out for dinner. And give me your time. Trust me, give me your 2 hours, and I promise to you, it would be one of the best investment that you would have done in some time. We have next about half an hour, 40 minutes talk by Professor John to be followed by question answer session. Please use the chat box or the text box that's there in front of your screen. All those questions, all those queries, all those doubts, please write to me, and I promise to you that all these queries will be sorted, all these doubts will be presented to Dr. John, and we would present you the best possible solutions for the queries that you have. After that, we will have a small presentation by each of the Indian experts, and we'll have again a small question answer sessions in the end. Before I hand over this mic or the stage to Doyen in the field and leave stage for him, I have to thank organizers, and that's Team Lupin. My association with Lupin is about 3 decades old, and I've been very closely working with Lupin for about, since the time, to tell you truth, since the time Mr. Hirak Bose joined headquarters. I know him since the day when he was just a manager on a small territory, that is Bengal, and I had a pleasure of meeting him on my multiple academics tour to Northeast. Very closely watched his journey for last 3 decades. One of the most hardworking, sincere, and workaholic, as I call him. He does not know what holidays mean. Even today, he would open his book, will have pen on his hand, and all points, all discussion that you do, he would pen it down. You might forget, but he would remember this. He would work on it. He would visualize it. He would execute it. And there cannot be any mistake. There just cannot be any mistake. And that's what Hirak Bose is to me. He took this respiratory business from its nascent stage to be heard, the second topmost company in respiratory with more than 38% share, whatever he was talking to us about. His all credit goes to Hirak and his team. The entire team, I know Sanjay Kesari, another sincere and committed worker with his, whenever I think of him, I remember his signature smile. And then you have Shekhar, you have Uday, and those hundreds of Lupinites who have worked tirelessly to bring this program to you. So thanks, Team Lupin, for your love and for giving me this opportunity to be here. My regards to Rajiv Sibbal, a national president and another close friend of mine. And of course, Nilesh Bhai, who is responsible for continuing the legacy of what Mr. Deshbandhu Gupta, or lovingly what we call it as DBG, for his passion for TB and respiratory disease. So with those words, it's time for me now to introduce the speaker. And speaker is Dr. John Hogne. So may I request Dr. John Hogne to please come. Dr. John Hogne is the Director and Clinical Research R&D of NHS Glasgow, Scotland, and a part-time general practitioner and the hospital respiratory specialist. He holds fellowship of both, Royal College of General Practitioners and the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh. He is a past president of International Primary Care Respiratory Group and a former chain of GPAG UK. He holds honorary academic position both at University of Glasgow and University of Aberdeen, travels extensively, and his asthma is his subject, is passionate about it. On the current major piece of work, he is part of development of team of formal asthma symptom score, which is commissioned by US FDA. So with those words, I present Dr. John Hogne to you. Over to you, Dr. John.
Good
evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Could you put your thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. I'm speaking to you from one of my universities, the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. I live in Glasgow, which is 200 miles away. You'll note that I fly the flag of Scotland on my first slide, not the flag of the UK. I find I make friends more easily if I come from Scotland. This weekend, of course, there are many more British flags, Union Jacks flying because of the death of the Queen, which has had a major impact on the way the UK is behaving at this time. Here are my declarations of interest. I also work at the University of Glasgow, but my main job is as a doctor working for the NHS in Glasgow. So this is what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes or so. We're going to look at the burden of obstructive airways disease. We're going to look a little bit at guidelines, which is always a great place to start and which gives us a fulcrum for our discussions. We'll look at the pharmacology of fluticasone formoterol, some of the clinical evidence, and a summary. And as has been said, we'll have a question and answer session, so please send in your questions and I'll be very happy to answer them for you. So what is the global burden of asthma? Well, it's huge. Exactly how huge, we're not quite sure, because it seems there are many people who have asthma in different parts of the world who haven't yet received a formal diagnosis. And without a formal diagnosis, they can't be registered as having asthma and they can't get access to the kinds of treatment that will help them. I do want to emphasize the point that the days of using short-acting beta agonist and oral corticosteroid as the only treatments for asthma must be put to side now, and we must concentrate on using inhaled therapies for asthma that must contain an inhaled steroid. So there's a burden of deaths, and there's a burden of the number of people who are affected, and a massive impact on the health of the globe. The term disability adjusted life years is a term that's used in health economics, which gives us a measure of just how much harm disease is causing. And of course, unfortunately, we still have mortality associated with asthma, which is something which should be a disappointment to all of us. Asthma deaths should be rare, and many, many of them are avoidable. And that's a goal that we should aim to work towards. So as I said, we'll start with the guidelines. Now, clinicians often look at guidelines, and the first thing they look at is, what treatment am I going to give? How will I treat my patient with medication? And sometimes we miss important parts of guidelines. And the bit I would like to draw your attention to is this piece on the left side where it says first assess. And I don't think this is actually given enough prominence. So just for a few minutes, I would like to look at first assess in a little more detail. This is a paper we published many years ago, which looks at the reasons for poor asthma control and what we must all consider before stepping up treatment. So if a patient comes to you with uncontrolled asthma, before you reach for a prescription pad, before you decide to prescribe, you must always consider the issues which are shown up in the maroon colored bar here. Have you got the diagnosis correct? Does this patient have asthma, or do they have another condition? Do they have hyperventilation? Do they have some cardiac condition that's causing breathlessness? Do they have COPD? We need to make an accurate diagnosis of asthma before we treat a patient for asthma. The most common reasons for poor control in my part of the world, and I suspect therefore in your part of the world, are the next two elements: poor compliance and poor inhaler technique. And I could speak to you for the next hour about these specific subjects. For some reason, actually a reason I probably understand, patients think of asthma as an intermittent condition, which therefore requires intermittent treatment. And one of the things we want to impress upon our patients is that it's a chronic condition that needs chronic management. And apart from the very mildest patients, we need to get into this habit of patients taking their medication regularly, taking some form of steroid-containing medication on a regular basis, even when they think they're well. The next problem is poor inhaler technique. Now, I understand the fluticasone formoterol preparation that will be made available to you is available in metered dose inhaler and dry powder forms. And that's one way to get around a poor inhaler technique. A patient who can't use one device may be able to use the other device. And this all comes down to their natural breathing pattern. If you're using a PMDI, a press and breathe spray inhaler, the trick is to breathe as slowly as possible. And a patient should aim to inhale over 5 seconds. And something I want you to try for me later when we finish the symposium is to try and breathe in from full expiration to full inspiration in 5 seconds. So I can breathe out and breathe in. I have to breathe very slowly indeed. In contrast, if you give a patient a dry powder inhaler, you have to breathe as quickly as possible. But patients should be able to manage one or the other. So select the device that's appropriate for your patient. The next thing you need to do is deal with comorbidities such as rhinitis. Your asthma won't get better if your rhinitis isn't under control. Patients who smoke have different needs, particularly around their steroid dose. And then and only then can we move back to the guidelines and think about treating properly. What we're trying to achieve is overall asthma control. And overall asthma control, I will emphasize one word: no daytime symptoms, no nighttime wakening. It's not acceptable to have patients who have symptoms. Apart from the most extreme cases of asthma, patients should have no daytime symptoms and no nighttime wakenings. It's time that we raised the bar in our attempts to get better asthma control. Do not accept daytime symptoms. Do not accept nighttime wakenings. If you've got these things, then the patient's not being treated properly, and we have to treat them better. Minimal side effects from medication is important. No rescue medication. You should hardly ever need to use additional rescue medication. And then in terms of future risk, which is where the concept of chronic disease comes in, we don't want patients ever to have exacerbations. An exacerbation in asthma is a failure of care, and that's not acceptable. I'm going to encourage you to try harder to manage your patients with asthma better, and thus we won't have a loss of lung function and so on. The good news is that if you achieve current control, then you will reduce future risk. So by managing the patient well in the day-to-day scenario, you will improve their chances of not having serious problems in later life. So back to the guidelines. Now, I could also speak for an hour about this new concept of track 1, where we never use a short-acting beta agonist. But this new iteration of the GINA guidelines emphasizes one thing consistently. And even in track 2, it says, take an inhaled corticosteroid whenever you need a short-acting beta agonist. And the strong message that is coming from GINA now is that asthma is an inflammatory condition and salbutamol is not an anti-inflammatory, and we must increase the use of inhaled steroids. In track 1, they suggest using a combination of the two. In track 2, they're emphasizing the early introduction of inhaled corticosteroids. Where you used to give a short-acting beta agonist, you must now also give a steroid. And when you've got to step 2, it's an inhaled corticosteroid. And then quickly moving on to inhaled corticosteroid LABA combinations, which is the theme of our symposium tonight. So, what is the role of inhaled corticosteroids and long-acting beta agonists in asthma? Well, apart from the very mildest patients who receive an inhaled corticosteroid alone, we should be moving quickly to inhaled corticosteroid long-acting beta agonist combinations. It's the mainstay of asthma treatment. And there's two components, but there's a bit more to it than just adding two drugs into the same device, because these drugs have synergistic effects. The long-acting beta agonist gives you 12 hours of bronchodilation, and the inhaled corticosteroid gives you anti-inflammatory effects. But the inhaled corticosteroid also upregulates the beta agonists in the airway, allowing the bronchodilator to work better. So actually, in this case, 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 and 1 equals 2.5. We get a little bit more by using these drugs together. And we're often told we should be trying to step down drug therapy. Most of us find it very difficult to take people off an ICS-LABA combination to step them down to a steroid alone. And that's because we see a big jump in efficacy from an inhaled steroid alone to an ICS-LABA. So if you have patients who are not managing on inhaled corticosteroids, it should be a very easy decision to step them up to combination therapy. So as I said, there's a synergistic interaction between the inhaled corticosteroid and the LABA. The steroid, following the blue line, following the green line, we see upregulation of the beta agonists, but we also see an increased effect of corticosteroids' anti-inflammatory properties by the presence of a coexisting long-acting beta agonist. A little bit about fluticasone and then about formoterol. So fluticasone, as we've heard already, is probably the most potent steroid that we have regularly available to us at the moment. It's highly lipophilic, which means the drug resides in the airways longer than any of the other commonly used steroids. It has a slower dissolution, and the pulmonary retention time is higher. That means it has a longer duration of action. This slide suggests there's a less frequent dosing use, but certainly in my country, we still tend to use fluticasone twice a day. There's no suggestion it should be used once a day in my country, but it certainly is retained much longer than some of the other steroids in the airways. Budesonide, for instance, forms an inactive ester when it's not being asked to perform. But the fluticasone, because of its high lipophilicity, resides a longer time in the airways. Now, depending what inhaler device you use, there's evidence to suggest that we get a better deposition of fluticasone and formoterol in the lung from the device, and we'll see that in the following slides. The amount of drug that comes out of the device and gets into the lung obviously has a very important part to play in managing a condition. And this is a measure of the efficacy of the device, of the compound and the design of the device that allows patients to get as high a fine particle fraction into the lung as possible. There's no point in sending large particles into the lung because they get stuck in the upper airways. What we're looking for is fine particles down at 2 to 4 microns, and they're the ones which will get into the lower airways where asthma is predominantly active in the lung. So, some studies for you. What we're looking at here is the fine particle fraction, looking at different formulations of therapy. So the ones which keep coming up, the ones which are most commonly used in the UK, budesonide, formoterol, fluticasone, salmeterol, and the one we're interested in today, fluticasone, formoterol. And in this study, which was done in vitro, they looked at inhalation rates in 2 different methods. They used the standard rates which are used for these in vitro tests, 28.3 litres a minute, which is just below what is thought to be the minimum necessary for activating a dry powder inhaler. To activate a dry powder inhaler regularly and consistently, you should achieve 30 litres a minute. Most people with asthma can manage this in most of the time, well over 30 litres a minute, certainly 60, even 90 litres a minute. But what this first slide on the left demonstrates that even in patients who are producing suboptimal inspiratory flows, fluticasone formoterol comes out well. When we get up to 60 litres a minute, which is a good inhalation rate for a dry powder device, it's still better, although the other devices do better than they did at the low rates. One of the consistent findings of the studies which we're showing today is that there tends to be at least equivalence and often some benefit. It's hard to claim that this translates into clinically meaningful outcomes because that's a difficult thing to measure. But what we're looking for is something which is at least as good and hopefully a bit better, because as clinicians, they're the kind of things that drive our prescribing. The bronchodilator in this combination, fluticasone formoterol, has established itself now as the usual natural choice for the management of asthma. Formoterol is long-acting with a duration of action approaching 12 hours. But the key to formoterol is it works as quickly as salbutamol. It has a very fast onset of action, an onset of action which is at least as quick as salbutamol. And this is important for 2 reasons. 1, because it gives fast bronchodilation, and 2, because patients recognize that it has a fast onset of action. If you use salmeterol, you would expect a full bronchodilation in 15 to 30 minutes. With fluticasone, you'd expect it in 1 or 2 minutes, as you would with salbutamol. And the patients recognize this, and they know that the drug is working, and they find that very reassuring. So in terms of the percentage of patients who can identify this benefit, you can see at 5 minutes that only 14% of the patients who had salmeterol as a bronchodilator were noting a response, whereas the patients with Formoterol as their bronchodilator, we're seeing that response much more quickly. After 120 minutes, there was still a difference, but at that point, salmeterol and formoterol should be working absolutely to their maximum effect. Patients who are not responding either didn't take the dose properly or must have some element of fixed airways obstruction. Now, it's important when you're making a prescribing decision, as we've heard already in this symposium, that fluticasone is a more potent drug than budesonide. And the broad rule of thumb is that you need about half the dose of fluticasone to be equivalent to budesonide. In terms of the doses that we're offered by pharma, the dose of fluticasone is usually in 250 micrograms or multiples or fractions of that. And budesonide tends to be 400. So the accepted view is that 250 micrograms of fluticasone equals 400 micrograms of budesonide. And it's important to note that because it's more potent, the dose you need is less. So don't switch one for one, because then you'll be giving a higher dose, unless that's your intention, because you're trying to give a higher dose of steroid. And as we've heard in vitro testing, it's certainly appears to have a much more powerful anti-inflammatory effect on some of the measures that can be made in laboratory experiments. Clinical evidence. Now, when I give presentations, I'm always asked by the organizers to share an example, give us a patient profile, describe how this has helped an individual patient. And in this study, Vibeke Bakker, who's a respiratory professor in Denmark, didn't give us one example. She gave us 2,539 case histories as an example. And what she did in this study was she took patients who weren't doing well on whatever combination they were on before and switched them to fluticasone formoterol. Now, those of you who are practicing clinicians will immediately identify as this is exactly the scenario we were in. So it's not a randomized controlled trial of which one's better. It's taking patients who are doing badly on one therapy and switching them to another therapy. And what we found when this happened was that there were impressive results in terms of switching from other drugs to either another ICS LABA or to formoterol fumarate, fluticasone, formoterol fluticasone combination. And you can see some very impressive improvements in the control rate. 67% of the patients were benefited from this switch from other therapies to fluticasone formoterol. And when they were given a different ICS LABA, then the rate of control was substantially less. And as I said before, current control leads to reductions in future risk. And after this switch, open label, switch them from a drug which wasn't working to fluticasone formoterol and see an impressive reduction in the frequency of exacerbations. This is real life scenarios giving us real life data on an option for you to consider when your patients aren't well controlled on the drug they're on. Were physicians satisfied? Yes, they were, because physicians recognized the improvements that the patients had. Massive satisfaction amongst the physicians. These are large numbers of patients. These are, 2,500 patients. A lot of physicians were involved in this. Physician satisfaction very high. Did the patients take the drug? Well, we know that patients who find a drug valuable are more likely to take the drug. So adherence, satisfaction, compliance went up as well. Patients reported that they felt a benefit from this drug and were happy to use it. Tolerability, high scores again across the board, very high scores for tolerability from fluticasone formoterol. This is a different study, and this is looking at lung function. Now, as I said before, we're looking at intra-class differences. So in these studies, we're comparing a steroid with a steroid, a long-acting beta agonist with a long-acting beta agonist. We're not expecting to see massive differences. But what we do see consistently, and this is in terms of lung function, is that fluticasone formoterol is at least as good, and we can argue about the statistics and the clinical relevance, but consistently we're seeing some suggestion that it's better, and that's useful to remember. In mild to moderate asthma, in terms of reducing SABA use remained reasonably high. We're seeing an improvement in SABA use. We're seeing an improvement in the asthma quality of life questionnaire scores. We're seeing an improvement in daytime symptoms, although I'm always a little bit skeptical when I see 100%, because you would always think that something could go wrong somewhere. Lower risk of exacerbations with fluticasone formoterol in this study by Alberto Papi, a leading Italian pulmonologist. What he did in this study was he looked at the studies of fluticasone formoterol and compared it to a Cochrane database of all the studies of fluticasone, cimeterol, budesonide, formoterol. So it's not a direct comparison, it's an indirect comparison, but once again, there's evidence that fluticasone formoterol would be a good choice. My interest in this area goes back more than 10 years, maybe 12 years. And we did a study in this university in Aberdeen. And we were interested in November 2009, 13 years ago, about what clinicians thought would be the best drugs to put together. This was before fluticasone formoterol was in a combination inhaler. And we asked clinicians what they would like to see as a combination inhaler. And the results of the survey suggested that fluticasone formoterol was their preference, even though it wasn't currently available. And this was how their choices broke down. Now, if you look at the second component, which is the long-acting beta agonist formoterol, you'll see that formoterol nearly always comes as the first choice. So formoterol were the first three choices. If you look at fluticasone, then you'll see that fluticasone without formoterol was always the first choice. And the combination of the two together was one that was clearly called for by UK physicians at that time, and of course is now available. In terms of safety, remembering that fluticasone is a more potent drug and we have to be careful with the dosing to make sure we have equivalence if that's what we intend to have. This study by David Price, who works in this university, is in over 200,000 patients in the UK. And he looked at all the studies, he looked at all the patients who were on these three choices in asthma: fluticasone, cimeterol, budesonide, formoterol, fluticasone, formoterol, and the amount of pneumonia that was reported, and fluticasone, formoterol came out best. Now, again, this isn't a randomized study, and it may be that clever physicians are using clever drugs, but once again, the evidence is in favor of fluticasone formoterol, in this case, in terms of safety. In terms of cardiac arrhythmias and ischemia, once again, fluticasone formoterol performs well. Same study. So, we see a better improvement. Importantly, in studies where patients have been switched, we can achieve superior asthma control, not a randomized control study, a real life scenario, superior asthma-related quality of life, and less risk. That sounds a good combination of outcomes. Let's move on and speak briefly about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The global burden of COPD, as in asthma, can't be quantified exactly because of the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people perhaps who live with COPD but haven't received a formal diagnosis. The global burden of COPD has been estimated in lots of population studies. I'm looking at the dots around India. So I think that's probably Delhi. You'll know better than me. Is that Calcutta? And I wondered if this one down here was Madras, Chennai. It's not quite in the right place. I was in Chennai a few years ago, just before the COVID outbreak, and they told me they had the best cricket team in the whole of India. I don't think they're on the call, so we don't necessarily need to believe that. Some of you will have your own views, I'm sure. Risk factors for COPD. When I was young, COPD was almost exclusively a disease of men. And in post-industrial UK, it was only men who smoked. And then along came the 60s and women were liberated. A lot of women started smoking at that time. And the percentage of people smoking with in the UK now is about 50-50 men and women. And that's bad news for women because they do seem to be at much greater risk of developing COPD than men. In my part of the world, it's always tobacco use. For some of you, it might be for biomass exposure, depending where you are. And it's got a very high mortality rate. COPD management guidelines. I think the GINA guidelines are very helpful and very clear in their advice. So what they've done in the GINA guidelines is to use two categories. One is in terms of your exacerbation rate. If you've had 2 or more exacerbations, and that can mean courses of steroids, then you're above the line. If you've got symptoms, significant symptoms, the equivalent to an MMRC of more than 2, which is you can't keep up with your peers when you're walking, or a formal CAT score of more than 10, then you're to the right of this line. So patients in group A don't suffer exacerbations regularly, no more than 1 moderate exacerbation, don't have a lot of symptoms, give them any bronchodilator. Patients who don't have exacerbations but do have symptoms, give them a long-acting bronchodilator, a LABA or a LAMA. In the UK, by some kind of chance or decision, our combinations of LABA, LAMA together cost no more than either or. So we tend to move straight to dual bronchodilator therapy and give our patients both a LABA and a LAMA in a combination. Group C are an interesting group. They've got exacerbations, but not many symptoms. I don't think you'll find many patients in this group. And then group D is a little bit more complicated, but drives one of the main therapeutic decisions that we have to take in terms of choosing our therapy. And this is the expanded version of the group D box. And your choice of either 2 bronchodilators, LABA plus LAMA, or LABA plus ICS, LABA plus inhaled corticosteroids, depends on the tendency for a patient to either have asthmatic type symptoms, or what's now used extensively in Europe, a measure of their eosinophil count. If you've got a raised eosinophil count in COPD, you should always be on an inhaled corticosteroid. If you've exacerbated at least once, certainly more than once, you must always be on an inhaled corticosteroid. If you don't exacerbate, if you don't have asthma symptoms and you don't have a raised eosinophil count, then it's safe to proceed with a LABA-LAMA, taking out the inhaled corticosteroid and therefore reducing the risk of pneumonia and other side effects. But increasingly, the move is towards inhaled corticosteroids for patients who've got asthmatic type symptoms or asthmatic type features or a raised eosinophil count. Raised eosinophil count, always give an inhaled corticosteroid. And the eosinophil count can vary over time. Patients who exacerbate see an increase in their eosinophil count. That's the trigger, both the eosinophil count and the exacerbation, to make sure they're on at least a LABA plus ICS combination. So if we look a little bit about what's happening with eosinophils, there's been plenty of studies now in Europe, in Asia, and in India. The study from India suggests that 39% of your patients with COPD will have a significant blood eosinophilia. 440 cells is plenty high. Anything over about 300 would indicate that that patient should be on a steroid. Or if they've had exacerbations, in these cases, you must go to inhaled corticosteroid LABA combination. So the measure of blood eosinophilia gives you a measure of lung eosinophilia, and lung eosinophilia will respond to corticosteroid treatment. You can measure that if you want with FeNO. FeNO will also measure the potential response to corticosteroid treatment. And by treating the eosinophilia, you will reduce the risk of exacerbations, you'll reduce the risk of remodeling, and you'll probably improve the immediate well-being of the patient. So in patients with moderate to severe COPD, the patients who are going to receive this kind of treatment and with eosinophilia, there is no question that the early introduction of a steroid containing compound will reduce the reduction in FEV1 over time. The so-called Fletcher-Peto curve will be flatter if the patients are treated appropriately. So early diagnosis and early intervention in appropriate patients will give you better long-term outcomes. We see this again here in terms of FEV1, health status, exacerbation rate. In patients who have eosinophilia, there are indications that the treatment with inhaled corticosteroid will be better. And the same type of analysis, again, a post hoc analysis from Alberto Papi's study in terms of clinically important deteriorations, proper dosing with the right dose of inhaled corticosteroid containing compounds. In this case, fluticasone formoterol will lead to a longer time to first event. In Papi's study, rather uniquely, he used a measure of patient-reported outcome measures, both for exacerbations and for respiratory symptoms. And that didn't work quite as well as he would have hoped. It caused some problems, but we could see from the study in terms of patient-reported outcome measures, the patients who were receiving fluticasone formoterol performed well. I think we have to be careful that we don't overinterpret a number of different outcomes, but the consistent message throughout my presentation is that we're seeing improvements. In this case, in terms of the St. George's Respiratory Questionnaire, to see a clinically significant improvement, you're really looking for a 4-unit change. But once again, we're comparing good therapies with better therapies, so we don't see these dramatic shifts. This isn't a placebo-controlled study. This is against active treatment. So improvement of something approaching 2 isn't a bad outcome. So if you use fluticasone formoterol in the management of COPD, you would expect to see a lower rate of moderate and severe exacerbations. You would expect to see less of a decline in FEV1 over time, and you would expect to see an improvement in FEV1 and FVC and breathlessness scores. And it looks like as long as the doses of the drug are comparable, there's no increased risk of serious adverse events versus other ICS LABAs. Any concerns around fluticasone having an increased risk of pneumonia have been expunged by the European authorities because it tends to be a dose-related issue. And if the dose of the fluticasone you give is equivalent to the dose of budesonide, then there doesn't seem a problem. Now, we've heard about how you join CME events. But the most important thing about a CME event is not just to listen to me and my colleagues, it's to take away a message. And what I'm showing here is the UK cycling team. And the last couple of Olympics, the UK cycling team has shown extraordinary success. And it's not quite clear why that would be. Some people said because there was cheating involved, and that might be the reason. But the reason that's given is because of what they call incremental change. They make the wheels 2% better. They make the handlebars 2% better. They make the helmets 2% better. They make the bikes 2% better. They make the riders 2% better. And by these small increments of change, they get a better outcome. So what I want you to do when you go back to work on your next working day is to try and do something a bit better. Try and make compliance a little better, make inhaler technique a little better, raise the bar in terms of what you expect to achieve, make your prescribing a little better, make your diagnosis a little better. And if we all make everything a little better, then the impact on the health of patients in India will be much more than a little better. So that's my ask for you. Listen to what you hear today and then go out and do something and make somebody a little better. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. John. That was fantastic presentation. You took us from the journey of asthma to COPD, and you showed about the advantage of this combination therapy. I'm sure everybody here was convinced that Formoterol is a good bronchodilator. Everybody was convinced that yes, fluticasone is a good, anti-inflammatory drug. And you have convinced us today that combination therapy really has got sheer advantages over the other combination therapies of LABA and inhaled corticosteroid. And I'm very much thankful to you that you promised us to stay here with us till the end of this meeting. I still can't resist myself but to ask you a few questions. Of course, we would take up all the questions at the end once we have the Indian flavor also to the presentation. But allow me to ask you a few questions. Now, my first question is, what is the overall international acceptance to this newer GINA recommendation? Now, GINA is very clearly saying that no to only steroid. It is talking about combination therapy. It is talking about combination of reliever therapy and controller therapy against all stages of asthma. What are your views to it? What do you feel is your views, and what do you feel is the global acceptance level to this?
Okay, so my views, my personal views are very strong. For the last 20 years, I've been speaking to doctors about improving asthma care. And the most important impediment to delivering good asthma care is a patient's reliance and sometimes a clinician's reliance on salbutamol. And salbutamol isn't an anti-inflammatory. So the concept of giving patients what's called an anti-inflammatory reliever, which is the concept of Formoterol, which works just as quickly as salbutamol, but with an inhaled corticosteroid with it, to me seems a fantastic idea. And I think it should be universally accepted across the world. However, the European regulatory authorities didn't agree with that. And the concept of anti-inflammatory reliever has not received a license in Europe. And the reason for that was the regulators felt that we should encourage patients to use regular inhaled corticosteroids, which is a good treatment. But it's a treatment we've been trying for 20 years and we can't get our patients to use. So they've taken a theoretical and academic view rather than the view of the need to try something different and to be more pragmatic about our management. So personally, I think it's a great idea. It's licensed in nearly all the countries of the world except Europe, but it's not used in Europe.
Yes, that's an interesting point. And, another thing I wanted to ask you is, you have convinced us that fluticasone definitely scores over other inhaled corticosteroids. Now, I still fail to understand. In the equipotent dosages, so when I'm talking about fluticasone say 125, or when I'm talking about budesonide, say 200, when I'm talking about mometasone for that matter, in different combinations, when we are talking about those equipotent dosages, do you still feel that in clinical practice, there is a sheer advantage of fluticasone over other steroids? And if so, why?
Okay, so I think the important thing that comes out of the guidelines is that we use ICS LABAs. So the message that you and I will agree on is that we use ICS LABA. So we use an ICS and we use a LABA, and that's good. I think it's easier to argue that formoterol is a better LABA than salmeterol. So formoterol, in just about everybody's opinion, is a better therapy. In terms of the steroid, that's much more difficult to measure because, as you say, we use equipotent doses and they're designed to be equipotent. And the message there is, if they're equipotent, we would expect similar outcomes. And most of the studies I showed was that the equivalents, the other steroids are good. There may be some additional benefits. But in terms of the steroid, they're not as striking as the difference between formoterol and salmeterol. So there is some evidence that fluticasone is better in some aspects, but it's not the same dramatic split in terms of outcome measures as you can see when you measure fluticasone and salmeterol. Now that might be because we can't do enough studies to demonstrate that, and it might be because by choosing equivalent doses, we're trying to make the drugs equivalent. So it's a difficult thing to tease out, but there's certainly theoretical and some evidence to suggest that fluticasone is at least as good as steroid and might have some benefits.
Okay. And then in the continuation, if I ask you, now you have ultra long acting beta agonist as well available in market, at least in India, we have routinely available. So how do you position farmetol vis-a-vis you have now, say, indacaterol, or you have various others ultra long acting beta agonist also? So your views on that, which are quicker acting and which are as long acting or maybe more long acting than the molecule of interest today?
Yeah. So indicaterol's an interesting drug. It's quick acting as well as it works as quickly. Indicaterol is, in my part of the world, is used once daily. It's only available in combination with ciclesonide, which isn't most clinicians' steroid of choice. So to sum up that, indicaterol is not an extensively used bronchodilator in the UK or in Europe. It's not one of the ones which are regularly used, even though theoretically there's no reason why that should be so. I think that's just established in clinical practice.
So in India, we are spoiled for choices now because we have always had passion for or liking a soft corner for farmetol. Now we have indacaterol, we have vilantrol, and the things are getting even more complicated. So how to choose the right molecule? Would you have any particular phenotype of a patient where you can predict that this patient would do better on salmeterol or this patient would do more on farmetol? I'm talking about only beta.
So vilantrol is used a bit more, and vilantrol is once daily. So patients who want to take their therapy once daily might prefer to use vilantrol. Does a patient want to use the therapy once a day or twice a day? Depends on the individual patient. If you miss one dose, then you've got no doses. If you're taking it twice a day and you miss dose, you're at least getting some. I leave it to personal preference. I always take my therapy twice a day. So I brush my teeth twice a day. So I take my therapy twice a day. But we know that lots of patients will take, antihypertensives once a day, statins once a day, and so on. So I think that comes down to patient choice, clinician choice, rather than evidence that I could show that would demonstrate that one is better than another.
Okay, before I probably invite the Indian speaker to take the things further, I have a last question.
Sorry to intervene. This is from Mumbai location, Shikhar. So there's some question from Kolkata location. The audience would like to ask one of them.
Yes. We would do that. Will you please flash those questions? I can't see it on my screen.
So if you want, we can make it live right now. The audience can ask directly with
Oh
your
yes,
permission.
you can do that. You can do that. But before that, I have a question which I want to clear it before I pass it on to
Sure.
So Dr. John, if your presentation convinces me that yes, Formoterol Fluticasone is a good combination. So suppose if there is a asthmatic patient that comes up to me tomorrow, the very first patient that I see now, would you think that this combination would be the perfect choice for any asthmatic that I'm talking to you about? Say anybody who's got probably any asthmatic who's symptomatic, you would agree that means it is uncontrolled asthma. So any uncontrolled asthma, would you think is the candidate for Formoterol Fluticasone combination?
I see no reason why not. I would want to make sure that the patient was going to be compliant with the medication. I would want to make sure that the patient was able to use the inhaler device properly. But fluticasone formoterol is a combination that should always be considered in this scenario.
So you mean for all asthma patients? Of course, you've confirmed diagnosis, looked at compliance, everything put together.
So patients who've got the mildest asthma will get an inhaled corticosteroid alone, a low-dose inhaled corticosteroid. But if their asthma is not controlled on a low-dose inhaled corticosteroid, then you're going to give them an ICS LABA, pretty much across the board. And I don't think we can. There's any rules which would say you would give this particular patient this particular combination, that
Correct.
particular patient that combination. There's no evidence that suggests that there's a scenario where any of these combinations are superior in subgroups of patient classification.
So to your mind, this can be considered as first-line therapy when it is asthma and when they are requiring ICS LABA combination. This could be
absolutely. But all the others are first-line choices as well. So this is in the group of first-line choices. And if clinicians are impressed by the combination of fluticasone and formoterol, that would be their choice.
Wow, great. And then I invite that question from Calcutta. Would you please unmute the delegate there, and will you please identify yourself, introduce yourself, and go ahead with the question?
Thank you, Dr. Vora. So with permission from my chair, Dr. Arup Haldar, I'm just going to ask Dr. John, there is two questions I have. So first of all, you had shown some clinical studies which had shown some effectiveness of fluticasone formoterol FDC. So in that particular study, you had taken they had taken the arm after some baseline treatment, but they had seen the changes that happen from the baseline and what happens after that. But what they compare it with some therapy which was ongoing. But we all know that, we all appreciate that for having a good effective asthma therapy, the adherence, the technique, these are very critical issues. And when some patients are included in particular studies, they have something we call as treatment bias. So as we are having some treatment and we are scrutinized by some investigation team, there will be no doubt in that there will be more stringent check in the technique, adherence, and other issues, which are very important. So how you take this area when we are interpreting these results, when just comparing from some baseline therapies which were ongoing, which were unsupervised, but after this formoterol fluticasone therapy, it was definitely supervised. And another issue is that regarding that some studies which were on some safety issues, you had mentioned in the summary slides that fluticasone propionate was safe compared to that budesonide formoterol combinations. But in the previous slides where you were summarizing those studies, the events of the cardiac arrhythmia or even the pneumonia, that was more in, at least numerically, it was more in fluticasone propionate arm. So what is your take on this? And number two question is, when we are talking about asthma management, yes, asthma in airway inflammation is the cornerstone, but there are some other A's also important, that is adherence access to medicine, and affordability. So considering these 3A, how you place this combination, this fixed dose combination of fluticasone formoterol in Indian perspective or some perspective where in the developing countries?
Excellent questions. Thank you very much. So I run a research facility and I look at study design a lot of the time. So your first question was around the validity of the study design, and I completely agree with you, because the alternative would be to take patients who were on fluticasone formoterol and to give them another therapy and to see how that came out. But unfortunately, I didn't design that study. I can only report the outcomes of that study. But I agree with you that if you're doing this, there's going to be some inherent bias. If you put somebody on a treatment and they fail, they're probably going to do better on a different medication. So that's a very valid point, which I accept. The second one around pneumonia isn't my view, it's the view of the European Medicines Agency. And their view was that as long as the doses of the inhaled steroids are equivalent, then there doesn't seem to be a pneumonia signal. So that the suggestion that fluticasone caused a higher pneumonia rate was probably down to the fact that fluticasone was given at a much higher dose. And certainly in the management of COPD, for many years, the standard dose of fluticasone in Europe was 2,000 micrograms, and the standard dose of budesonide was 800 micrograms. So that's 2,000 micrograms of a drug which is 1.4 times more potent compared to 800 micrograms, and that probably explained the pneumonia signal. It's become such an issue in Europe that pharmaceutical companies aren't allowed to make any claims around pneumonia and inhaled corticosteroids, because it's been so contentious, discussed at such a strong level that they've kind of put a moratorium on further discussion around it. And your third question about access and affordability, well, I'm afraid I'm not the right person to answer that, because it'd probably be better for one of my local colleagues who knows more about the affordability of drugs in your country. ICS LABA are more expensive than inhaled corticosteroids alone, but the cost effectiveness benefits that have been conducted in my country suggest that they represent good value for money. But how the different classes of drugs and the different individual therapies that are available work out in terms of access and affordability is something I'll have to leave to colleagues who understand the local scenario.
I think I completely agree. When it comes to affordability and availability, so I think all these drugs are comparable, and especially when it comes to the houses like Lupin, I'm sure it's going to be available across the country. So I think those issues are probably anybody has any comment on this? Kolkata team, you have any further comments on availability and cost part? I think it would be easy, right?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay. So this is Dr. Arindam. I am from practicing pulmonologist from Kolkata. Okay. So my concern is, as the evidence has been shown so far, are mostly for the controls. Okay, the formoterol fluticasone is for the controls. So how do we place, or what is your take, Dr. John, as far as the smart approach or the reliever of this formoterol fluticasone is concerned?
I'm really sorry I wasn't able to hear that properly. Did somebody else hear it who could outline the question for me?
Okay, I am repeating it for you.
I think your microphone might be a little bit too close to your mouth.
Am I audible to you? Am I audible to you, sir?
Yes, you're audible now. And Dr. John, the question was, if I understood it correct, the question was, can the combination be used as smart approach? Right? That was the question?
Absolutely.
Yes, right. So the GINA guidelines recommend ICS formoterol for use as anti-inflammatory reliever, and there is no theoretical reason why it would not be available for use in the SMART regime. However, in the UK, we are driven by what the licensing authorities say. And at the moment, we have, for SMART regime, we're allowed to prescribe budesonide formoterol and beclomethasone formoterol. But that's not because fluticasone formoterol has failed. It's just that the study has never been done that shows it can be used in this way. So theoretically, and the GINA guidelines recommend ICS formoterol for anti-inflammatory reliever therapy. In Europe, there's not a license to use fluticasone formoterol for SMART approach.
So that's my question, sir, that all the studies that has been quoted in the GINA as well for the SMART approach is mainly on the formoterol and budesonide. Okay.
Yes.
So do we as of now have it?
But to be fair, nearly all the studies have been done on formoterol budesonide, but formoterol beclomethasone has been able to get a license for SMART, even though the same number of studies haven't been done.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think we move on to the next part of the discussion, and Dr. John, please don't go away.
Yeah, I am Dr. Rahul Sharma. Dr. Agam, I am Dr. Rahul Sharma from Delhi. So I must congratulate Dr. John for the wonderful talk. So I have a very simple question here. So whenever we are talking about a patient who is not doing well on LABA-ICS combination, we try to recollect the diagnosis, whether it is correct or not, the associated comorbidities, compliance, technique. So now with your talk, are you suggesting that we should also change the molecule along with this rather than labeling these patients as difficult to control asthma or severe asthma with looking into all the aspects, and we are correcting technique, compliance, comorbidities? So do you prefer that we should also change the molecule, as no guidelines suggest that when a patient is taking LABA-ICS combination and not doing well despite correcting all other factors, you should change the molecule?
Okay, so I think we come from the same starting point, which is we have to make sure the diagnosis is correct, the patient's compliant, and they're using a device which is giving us a satisfactory outcome. So it's not quite as simple as just changing the molecule, it's changing the therapy. And by changing the device in my country, that often means changing the therapy as well. So this inhaler device isn't working well, let's try a different inhaler device, and that may include changing a therapy. Now, Vibeke Bakker's study showed in 2,800 patients that there was a benefit in doing that. Again, the same might apply the other way around. Patients who are failing on fluticasone formoterol might do better on something else. So like you, I would check the diagnosis, I would check the inhaler technique, I would make sure the patient could use the drug, but I certainly wouldn't be against changing the molecules, because continuing to do the same thing and getting a poor outcome isn't an option. So we have to do something, and maybe we should do everything. But which element it is, if the patient's clearly just not using the inhaler properly, then let's get them to use the inhaler properly, and that might be sufficient. But by changing a therapy, you may just stumble on something which gives your patient a better outcome. You certainly couldn't give them a worse outcome.
So other aspect of changing the molecule. So we have this formoterol budesonide and salmeterol fluticasone with us. So we are always hurrying towards formoterol budesonide for the two reasons. Formoterol is a SMART molecule, and budesonide causes less pneumonia as per literature versus fluticasone. So your take on this, when the patient is on formoterol budesonide, not doing good, and there are risks of pneumonias, that this is always a controversial talk, that whether these pneumonias are because of the nature of the disease or it is because of the molecule that we are using.
Yeah, no, I take your point, but if a patient isn't doing well on formoterol budesonide, and many do, what are we going to do? We're going to give them more formoterol budesonide. We're going to improve the technique. What else are we going to do? If we can try something which shows a response, as Becker's study showed us, it might be an option. Lots of people do very well on formoterol budesonide, that's fine. If we come across patients who are not doing well, what is the reason for that? Is it because they're being undertreated? Is it because of compliance? Is it because of fine particle fractions? Are they getting the right amount of drug to the right part of the lung? Is one drug going to work better than another? We all have got plenty of examples in clinical practice where, for some reason, one drug from a class performs better than another drug from a class in different patients. So it's about being pragmatic and having another golf club in your bag, or another arrow to fire, another option to consider, one which seems to be at least as good, where you can think about using an alternative when things aren't going as well as you would like.
Your point is well taken. I think when the things are not going good, rather than going for these expensive therapy, it is always better to try different molecule with good compliance and technique.
Anubhai, I think I'll stop you there. We now move on to the next part of the program, because this discussion is so interesting that we would be stuck only here and we would miss on the next presentations. So for this next presentation, Dr. John, thank you very much for your time, all your excellent explaining the things, that the way you explained it. But I would request you not to go away, because we have a lot of questions. As you could see, I can see another 20 odd questions on my screen. But before we do that, I would ask Dr. Rajesh Venkat. Dr. Rajesh Venkat is going to be talking to us about Indian scenario, patients' perception on asthma therapy in the continent that we practice, and positioning of Formoterol and Fluticasone in the armatorium that we have to fight asthma. Rajesh Bhai is a senior consultant and head pulmonary medicine at Rajagiri Hospital, Kochi, which is a tertiary care hospital, a multi-specialty hospital. He is a recipient of Santosham Memorial Gold Medal at a national level and DNB pulmonary exams in 2006, and is a young recipient of Young Pulmonologist Award by the Academy of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine in 2013. He has been doing postgraduate teaching at his institute and has trained number of doctors during their residency, and reputed faculty in multiple national and international congresses, core organizers of various CMEs and meetings that I've attended. And on my personal note, my close friend for more than a decade and a half, and I look forward to meeting him whenever there is any opportunity. He hosted fantastic NAPCon, and that's Dr. Rajesh to you. So over to you, Dr. Rajesh. You're not audible.
Yeah, very good evening, Agam sir. And at the outset, let me congratulate the Lupin Respiratory Specialty Care team, our Hirak Saab and Keshri Saab and Mr. Sriram and all those people for coming up with this very relevant and very important aspect of asthma and COPD care. And I would congratulate Mr. Shikhar also for designing a wonderful academic schedule. And thanks to Professor Hogne for coming in between his busy schedule and enlightening us. And perhaps the star of the day is my own idol of worship, Agam sir, who is actually adding value, spice, and warmth to any of those academic sessions where he anchors. So I am given with this task of sharing with you all and discussing the patient perspectives of asthma treatment in India and positioning this molecule, Formoterol Fluticasone, for Indian patients. So what I will try to do in my next 10 minutes is that I will try to share with you the attitude of Indian patients to asthma therapy and asthma medications based on two Indian works, the AP-AIM study and the artwork study. And then I will share with you the unique aspects of Formoterol Fluticasone with regard to Indian patients based on the Indian real-world study by Dr. Ghoshal and the systematic review from India. Then based on this, how can we really position Formoterol Fluticasone for Indian patients with obstructive airway disease? What are the lacunae in evidences? And finally, what are the take-home messages? So if we look at the goals and preferences of Indian patients when it comes to asthma treatment, the AP-AIM study was published by Dr. Sandeep Salvi and colleagues. It's actually the Asia Pacific region Asthma Insights and Management Studies, which actually was a real world study. It was a survey rather conducted across 8 urban cities, 2 from each zones of India. Almost 400 patients were enrolled into the study. And what was looked at was how best asthma was controlled, what are the patient perspectives, what are the patient aims and goals of treatment, and how best they take their medications. That was what was looked at. And there was a huge discordance with regard to the patient perspectives of their asthma control versus the asthma control as is envisaged by the GINA guidelines. Almost all these patients were not fully controlled as per the GINA guidelines. 40 of them were uncontrolled and 60% of them were partly controlled only. Whereas when we look at from the patient's perspective, around 30% of them felt that they were very well controlled and 60% of them thought that they were somewhat well controlled. So there's a huge discordance. Asthma patients in India tend to overestimate their level of asthma control, which is much away from what is actually envisaged in guidelines. So 60% of these Indian patients believed that their asthma was very well managed, and even urgent visit to their doctor was, even if 2 urgent visits were needed per year, that was not that bad. And 55% of the asthmatics believed that their asthma was very well managed, even if they had 3 to 4 exacerbations per year. And 85% of them believed that quick relief rescue medications could be used every day rather than making it as a SOS basis. And unfortunately, many of those patients, almost 90% of them, preferred pills, and only around 40% preferred inhalers. So the key practice points and take-home messages for the Indian clinicians from this APAIM study was that we should really instill the need for better asthma control in patients' minds. We should stress the need and advantages of inhaled medications, and exacerbation prevention should be given top priority. And perhaps from the context of today's lecture, that the role of FF in asthma and COPD, patients require fast control. So we should give a controller that provides a rapid symptom relief when it comes to asthma therapy. The second one was the artwork study, which actually looked at biological therapy, the attitude of patients to biological therapy, which we had the good fortune of conducting. It actually stands for acceptance and results of therapy with omalizumab in real world Kerala setting, where we actually looked at. And it was seen that over 3 years now setting, almost 560 patients were looked at, 560 patients with uncontrolled asthma. And it was seen that only 80 of them, that is 15% of this uncontrolled asthmatics, were actually severe asthmatics. Rest 480 had simple modifiable factors. So out of this 80, 51 patients were suitable for omalizumab, and when they were offered the drug, only 1/3 of them accepted omalizumab and 2/3 of them actually opted out of omalizumab. So the reason for opting out was, cost factor was a major concern, and safety concerns over long-term treatment was also a major concern. So again, most of the patients took the treatment for a period of 6 to 8 months only, and again, economic reasons as well as concern for long-term side effects was a major issue for discontinuing treatment. So the key practice points for clinicians from this artwork study is that high-end therapy is needed only in a minority of asthmatics, as Dr. Hogne already clearly pointed out. Before jumping into high-intensity treatment, look at the easily modifiable factors, and including the change in inhaler medications. And then we need to provide the safest drug. We need to instill the need of a long-term duration treatment, and focus should also be given to the cost of therapy. So need to provide the safest drug. The most important safety concerns would be pneumonia as well as cardiovascular. So we need to provide the safest drug for our Indian patients. So comparing these two studies, the APAIM as well as the artwork study, what we can say is that we need to provide a reliever or a preventer with a rapid onset of action. We need to give preference to the economic aspects of Indian patients, because most of them actually pay from their pocket for medications, and we need to provide the safest ICS-LABA combination in terms of the lowest risk of pneumonia. So with this background, how can we position Formoterol Fluticasone for Indian patients? Again, I will come to a couple of studies. This was one real-world study, again conducted in Calcutta by Dr. Ghoshal and colleagues. Those patients who were having poor asthma control, when they were switched from their existing ICS-LABA to Formoterol Fluticasone, the asthma control actually increased to 10-fold. Again, I will stress on one point, because they are into a study, they will be better monitored, the adherence would be better ensured. So that may be a reason for this dramatic improvement. But whatever, Formoterol Fluticasone provided very good relief in almost some 370, 380 patients in this real-world Indian study. And then again, we have the FF compared with other ICS labas in asthma, the systematic review where we again were fortunate to look into that particular one. We evaluated around 16 studies, and it was seen that the very fast onset of bronchodilation was provided by Formoterol Fluticasone. So that is something that very well fits into Indian population because this excellent and fast symptomatic relief without posing the risk of SABA monotherapy. Again, this is optimal for Indian patients who desire a fast onset of action with the control of therapy. And again, this is very interesting. I don't think this was stressed in previous lectures, but I think it answers many of the previous questions. This systematic review actually looked at and found the fact that the risk of pneumonia with ICS-LABA combination was least with Formoterol Fluticasone. And this was a real-world UK study of almost 45,000 patients who were followed up for almost 2 years. So can very confidently say that the safest ICS-LABA when it comes to pneumonia risk in real-world conditions would be Formoterol Fluticasone. And that again very well suits the attitude of Indian patients because they want the safest drug. And again, systematic review showed that the lung function improvement is in par with FF as compared to any other ICS-LABA combination. And based on these attributes, one of the editorials in the Indian Journal of Tuberculosis actually said that inhaled steroid long-acting beta-2 agonist combination, there are many drugs that are available in India for asthma therapy, are all the formulations same. And it concluded by saying that a combination like Formoterol Fluticasone, which has attributes with many ideal and desirable properties, has a definite edge over other ICS-LABAs in clinical practice. So based on this evidences and this editorial, probably what I can say is that when we position Formoterol Fluticasone for Indian patients, at least when it comes to asthmatics, it probably is an upfront choice because of its rapid onset of action, similar clinical efficacy, least risk of pneumonia, reasonably economical, and potential to be used as a smart or mart, whatever be it. Whereas the recommendations are a bit less clear in COPD patients because the indication for ICS itself in COPD patients is a bit controversial. You can use it in asthma, COPD overlap, peripheral blood eosinophilia, frequent exacerbations, etc., etc., if there are no contraindications for ICS. Again, as what Professor Hogne shared, there is a decreased risk of moderate to severe exacerbations with FF, but the positioning has to be much better spelled out. Whether FF with another separate LAMA, is it equal or inferior to a triple combination as a single drug versus LABA versus other ICS-LABA. So that is a bit less clear area, whereas in asthma, it's clearly an upfront choice. The uncertainties, as I said just now, the systematic reviews and the meta-analysis have actually looked at FF versus FB and SF. That is salmeterol fluticasone, formoterol budesonide, and formoterol fluticasone has been studied in head-to-head trials, whereas FF has not really been looked at head-to-head trials with vilanderol fluticasone or indacaterol mometasone. So how best does it fare, FF fare with these agents is not very clear. That is one thing. And when it comes to COPD, how does FF fit in as a component of triple therapy with LAMAs, with various LAMAs, and whether with various ICS-LABAs with various LAMAs is less clear, as Dr. Agam said that we are spoiled with choices in the Indian subcontinent. And FF with a separate LAMA versus a triple drug in a single inhaler, how does it fare? That is also something which we don't know. So these are the research priorities and lack of clarities in evidence that we can think of right now. So if I can summarize the take-home messages, ICS with LABA, with formoterol being used as a smart or mart therapy is the standard of care in asthma. I don't think anyone will debate on that. And among the ICS-LABA, formoterol fluticasone can be considered as a prototype ICS-LABA and the upfront choice in asthmatics because of its superior pharmacological profile, ideal clinical attributes, excellent safety, and very good real-world rationale across the globe. So it's an upfront choice in Indian asthmatics. It's a reasonably good option for COPD patients also, but the lacuna evidences with regard to comparison with newer ICS-LABAs and the triple agent single inhaler has to be looked at. So thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajesh Venkat, for enlightening us with your views with the application of evidence to Indian practice and need of future gaps also. So all the respected doctors, we know there will be questions, but I think we will take the remaining questions after all the talks. So it is now my pleasure to invite and introduce Dr. Avya Bansal sir, our next speaker. I will introduce you his profile, and then I will hand over the screen to Dr. Avya Bansal sir. So Dr. Avya Bansal is a consultant chest physician at Bombay Hospital and Medical Research Center, honorary chest physician, Mumbai Police. He has been awarded with lot many recognitions, Sir Ratan Tata Scholarship during MBBS. He has been university topper in MD, best paper, best poster at Palmoka in 2017, recipient of ICSPRS Travel Grant, Madrid in 2019, honorary doctor to BMC during COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, sir. 9 national and international publications and delivered more than 50 talks and lectures and CMEs. So it's our honor to invite Dr. Avya Bansal, sir. Over to you, sir. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Without wasting further time, firstly, I'd like to thank DP for giving me this opportunity at this wonderful forum, and welcome to all the eminent speakers. We're patiently waiting for Agam sir to arrive, and he's entertaining us all in his car. Anyway, so let us start for today's topic, which is, does Formoterol Fluticasone score over other ICS LAVA combinations in the management of obstructive airway disease? We'll have 2 cases which we'll run side by side. So case 1, we've got Formoterol Fluticasone as initial treatment for asthma. So you've got a basic patient background and medical history. The demographics of the patient are, he's a 36-year-old male working as an IT consultant. He's come for consultation. He's got a history of asthma in his family. His father is asthmatic. Patient has been asthma since he was since he was 4 years old. So there's a history of childhood asthma, probably managed properly or not, and various factors have resulted in a recurrence of the disease. He's allergic to pollen and house dust mites. 2 years ago, he had a spirometry which was positive for reversibility. In the past 2 years, he's had about 1 to 2 exacerbations, which by definition would be worsening of symptoms. Exacerbations were triggered by a viral infection. Last year's exacerbations required oral corticosteroids, and he's been on maintenance therapy with budesonide 200 mics twice a day and SABA SOS. Now, what's the patient's feedback on the current therapy? That he takes budesonide as and when prescribed along with an SOS dose. And he's worried about his exacerbation, that in spite of being on inhalers twice a day, being regular, being compliant, taking it properly, having a good technique, why is he still exacerbating? Why is there no symptom-free, no relief from daytime, nighttime symptoms as well? And he needs to use SABA multiple times over a week. Now, coming to his clinical assessment, now the patient has isolated cough, no other respiratory symptoms. His symptoms vary with time and intensity, which is classical for asthma. He's got triggers, that is infection, exercise makes it worse, and there's constant allergy exposure for pollen and house dust mites. He produces sputum chronically. Symptoms are worse at night or early in the morning, correlates with the low corticosteroids in the body. There is wheeze, there is shortness of breath, and there's jet-itis. So if you look at the GINA guidelines, when they tell us to assess a patient of asthma, we fairly cover everything. We've got a proper history. We've got a strong family background. We've got a history of childhood asthma. Patients being on regular maintenance therapy with budesonide plus SABA on SOS basis, and his symptoms fit in asthma. He's a non-smoker, no history of allergic rhinitis. As we know, about 40% of all our asthmatics have ARIA. He understands his treatment, is comfortable with his inhaler. He's concerned about the side effects of the inhaler, which is why he gargles after using it. Uses a proper inhaler technique, uses it with a spacer. Reassure the patient, check the inhaler technique, everything seems proper. Yet the patient is having symptoms and he is exacerbating. On examination, 66 pulse, 25 BMI, 15 breaths per minute, bronchi are present. We did a peak expiratory flow, which was about 345 liters, which is about 70%, slightly lower than the expected 80%. A predicted FEV1 was 2.45. This was a pre-bronchodilator FEV1. To summarize, we've got a poorly controlled asthmatic in the last 4 weeks with daytime symptoms more than thrice a week, nighttime symptoms more than twice a week. Salbutamol requirement is more than 2 times in a week. There is no infection at present. He's afebrile. There is no green, yellow sputum being produced. No comorbidities, non-smoker. Inhalation technique is adequate. Patient is comfortable with the inhaler. There are no adequate side effects. He's doing well on that aspect. Now, coming to the pharmacological approach. Now, as needed SABA only, no. Low dose ICS with as needed SABA, question mark, that is the second track which has been recommended by Gina, and our patient is still symptomatic. In combination of low dose FF for maintenance and reliever therapy, that's smart therapy, yes. Combination of low dose ICS LABA therapy plus SOS basis SABA therapy, yes. LTRA with as needed SABA, no. Intermittent ICS with as needed SABA, no. So finally, we've come to the conclusion that this patient would benefit with an FF approach. Now, in GINA step 3, we've seen that starting at a higher step, step 3, the treatment should be considered as the first option would be an ICS Formoterol. Fluticasone Formoterol has got the lowest long-term risk of exacerbations, pneumonia, arrhythmias as compared to other ICS LABA, which has already been spoken by Dr. John Hoffney in his slides, as well as by Dr. Venkat. FF also offers superior asthma control, asthma-related quality of life, lung function with respect to other ICS LABA combinations, most notably budesonide Formoterol. And the patient was started on a low to medium dose of ICS Formoterol, which was 125 mics of fluticasone twice daily, which would be about 250. Coming to the second case-based discussion, which was the switch therapy, which Dr. Sharma had very validly pointed out when discussing with Dr. John Hoffney, that switch to fluticasone Formoterol maintenance and reliever therapy from fluticasone salmeterol. Now, coming to the patient background and medical history, often most of us tend to skip Formoterol when we have elderly patients fearing tachycardia, arrhythmias, multiple comorbidities, and often switch to or rather prefer salmeterol in these patients. Now let's look at a case where we had a patient already on fluticasone salmeterol. So like the common practice in elderly patients are 54-year-old male, he's working in a bank, so he's got a desk job. Mother's asthmatic. He's been asthmatic since he was 3 years old, then did well, and then again symptoms have resurfaced over the last few years. There's no history of any exposure or allergy. A year ago, a spirometry showed positive reversibility. He's again had a couple of exacerbations over the last 1 year, all triggered by seasonal variation and upper respiratory tract infection. One exacerbation required oral corticosteroids, and usual medication was, as needed, SABA plus a maintenance of fluticasone salmeterol. The patient's feedback on the current therapy is that he uses the fluticasone salmeterol prescription well, he's comfortable, and he uses the SABA 3 times a week, which makes him feel better and reduces his chest tightness. Again, assessing the patient clinically, he's got isolated cough, symptoms vary with time and intensity, infections which are triggers for asthma, yes. He's got chronic sputum production, no. Symptoms fairly worse during the day and at night. He again complains of chest tightness, breathlessness, cough, and a wheeze. Now, the whole point of this exercise is to achieve a good asthma control, and the patient is concerned that in spite of being on regular treatment, yet he's symptomatic and requires oral corticosteroids about 1 time a year. Additional information: non-smoker, no history of allergic rhinitis, controlled hypertensive, understands his treatment, is comfortable with the inhaler as Teachback approach was performed, and educated the patient about a single ICS LABA maintenance, and the reliever device was confirmed. On examination, hemodynamically stable. We've got a peak expiratory flow about 68% and a predicted FEV1 of 60%, which was a pre-bronchodilator. To summarize, we've got an uncontrolled asthmatic over the last 4 weeks with daily asthma symptoms, nighttime symptoms of 3 times a week, requires salbutamol more than 3 times a week, no infection at present, controlled hypertensive, non-smoker, comfortable with the current line of management, comfortable with the MDI with spacer, is gargling, there are no side effects, is yet symptomatic because of his poor inhaler choice, which has been prescribed by the doctor, and a poor quality of life. So the pharmacological approach in this situation would be an as-needed SABA, no, a combination of a medium dose FF plus reliever therapy, a combination of a medium or a high dose ICS LABA as needed SABA, LTRA with SABA, no, an intermittent ICS course with SABA, no. So here we are starting at a slightly higher step because we've taken into the consideration of the nighttime symptoms, the usage of reliever therapy of salbutamol, which is more than 3 times a week, plus his PFER and FEV1 was slightly lower, which would be comparable to a moderate obstruction in this case. So the patient was started on Formoterol Fluticasone, 250 mics twice a day, which would be about 500 mics a day, which is a medium dose ICS. Thank you. Questions will be taken at the end of the session.
Thank you, Dr. Arya Bansal, for sharing practical tips on using the right right combination in management of asthma. So we move ahead and invite our next speaker for today, Dr. Arup Haldar, sir, who is consultant pulmonologist, Wooden Hospital, Kolkata. So allow me to introduce sir for a while. Yeah. So Dr. Arup Haldar is MD in respiratory medicine. He is consultant pulmonologist attached to Woodland Hospital. He has 18 publications in national and international journals. He is a content writer in World Sleep Academy, USA, and member of World Sleep Society. He is a regular blogger in Arup's blog.wordplace.com. So we request all of you to visit that blog. And he has more than 22,000 readers across the globe. He is a mentor of Clean Air Medical Student Ambassador Program by Switch On Foundation. So it's our pleasure to invite Dr. Arup sir for his talk on glycopyrronium formoterol in COPD. Over to you, Dr. Arup sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ronak. It's a wonderful arrangement by Lupin today. And Agam sir, if you are here, we love your dynamic anchoring. You are not static, you are moving. But I can see you now, probably will join soon. This is a time to refresh the test. From asthma, we'll now move to COPD. And my topic of discussion is role of dual bronchodilation, that means glycopyrronium and formoterol in the management of COPD versus other LAMA and LABAs. So we know that COPD and asthma, two different diseases. In COPD, you have a fixed airway obstruction. This is due to the scar formation because of the inflammation, whereas in asthma, we have a variable and reversible airway obstruction. The drugs we use in asthma and COPD are basically both are same, but the order of use is not same. In COPD, we move from the LAMA to LABA to ICS, whereas in asthma, we move from ICS to LABA to LAMA. So we can conclude that in asthma, the default drug is always the LABA-ICS combination, and LAMA is required for few patients of asthma. Like in COPD, LABA and LAMA combination is the default combination, and ICS is required in few patients of COPD. This is a GINA recommendation. We all know the role of this dual bronchodilation comes in clinical practice actually in this group B or group D patients. And this is a real interesting study, the distribution of receptors. Why this dual bronchodilation actually is better than single one. If you look at the receptor distributed in the airway, the muscarinic receptor and the beta adrenoreceptors, you will see the segmental bronchus, you have the higher number of muscarinic receptors. And as you go deep into the lung, into the small airways and the lung parenchyma, the distribution of this muscarinic receptor actually decreases, whereas that of beta 2 adrenergic receptors actually increases. So if you combine the two, the effect is often synergistic, additive, and you get better bronchodilation. So all the studies done on LABA-LAMA has shown that LABA-LAMA combinations in COPD has actually improved the lung function. This is both in peak FEV1 and the trough FEV1. That means the FEV1 before the next dose. This has improved the transition dyspnea index. This is one kind of questionnaire always used in the COPD assessment as a COPD assessment tool and in SGRQ or St. George Respiratory Questionnaire. These parameters are used actually to assess the improved function of lung when we use certain drugs in COPD. The available LABA and LAMA in our country, we have a once daily combination and we have a twice daily combination. For once daily, we have the indacaterol glycopyrronium, vilanterol imiclidinium, olodaterol tiotropium. This is still not available in our country. And for twice daily, we have formoterol aclidinium, formoterol glycopyrronium combinations. Little pharmacology. Onset of glycopyrronium is only 5 minutes. Duration of action is 24 hours and the dose approved is 50 microgram per day. And for formoterol, the onset of action is 7 minutes, duration of action is 12 hours and dose approved 12 to 24 microgram per day. So glycopyrronium has a rapid onset of action and it is 3 to 4.8 times more potent than tiotropium. And rapid onset of action often translates into improved patient compliance. It can be used as a once daily or twice daily, means the glycopyrronium. We have a Konnect study on that. This study supports that the selection of glycopyrronium 25 microgram BID as a minimal effective dose for patients with COPD when delivered with extra fine DPI formulations. So what are the advantages of glycopyrronium over the other LAMA or especially over the tiotropium? The SPRING study have demonstrated that superior bronchodilation of glycopyrronium in the first 4 hours. That means improved patient compliance. Patient can perceive the effect immediately and patient will use the drug regularly. Glycopyrronium also have reduced the specific airway resistance or the ASROF faster than the tiotropium. And glycopyrronium has a greater equilibrium binding and kinetic selectivity for M3 and M2 receptors. We know we have 5 kind of muscarinic receptors and human body contains 3 types of receptors. Selectivity for M1 or M3 actually increases the potency of these anticholinergic drugs and it should disassociate quickly from the M2 receptors because that has an opposite action, that of M1 and M3. So glyco has a greater equilibrium binding to M3 receptors. And glycopyrronium has a little effect on the muscarinic receptors of the bladder. So we do not know whether that translates to less amount of retention of urine that we see often with tiotropium, but it is less, it has less action on the muscarinic receptor of the bladder. We have some Indian experience also with the glycopyrronium formoterol combinations versus the tiotropium formoterol combination. This is a very recent study just published in August 22 by Nalini Jayanti et al. And they have shown that they are both equally efficacious, but the side effect was lower in the glycopyrronium formoterol combination in terms of lesser dry mouth, lesser constipation, and lesser urination or retention. But these were not statistically significant and they have a very small sample size. It is done only on 60 patients of moderate and severe COPD. We have another Indian experience that is called the FINE registry. And in FINE registry, they have shown that in real life clinical practice in India, formoterol glycopyrronium FDC dry powder inhaler was well tolerated in COPD patients and can be regarded as an effective maintenance treatment in COPD. Other trials which has compared glycoformo versus other LAMA and LABA. We have the Pinnacle trial, Pinnacle 1, 2, 3, 4. They included moderate to very severe COPD patients, and glycoformo was associated with significantly greater improvement in lung function than its monocomponent or than of tiotropium at 24 weeks and even at 52 weeks. And we have the Aristo trial, which compared the glycoformo versus imiclodinium vilantrol dry powder inhaler. And that have shown that peak change in FEV1 within 2 hours post-dose is similar between these two groups, but not the trough change. And it was a better with the imiclodinium vilantrol combination, but statistically not significant again. In the GLOW5 trial, the GLOW2 trial and the GLOW5 trial compared the glyco versus tiotropium, and they have showed the glyco was similar, has similar efficacy and safety with faster onset of action than the tiotropium. When we compare glycopyrronium versus imiclodinium, that has shown that imiclodinium was non-inferior to glycopyrronium both in the primary endpoints and safety. And we have also compared the efficacy of various LAMAs in systematic review and meta-analysis. So one study has compared this aclidinium 400 BD versus glyco 50 OD versus tiotropium 18 and tiotropium 5. What they have found that trough FEV1 at 24 weeks, all are similar except the tiotropium 5, which has done inferior to all other drugs. But more or less, the other LAMAs were similar in efficacy and side effect was also very much comparable. So this is another systematic review and meta-analysis which compared these various aclidinium, glycopyrronium, imiclodinium, and versus tiotropium 18. And they also showed that SGRQ and transitional dyspnea index were similar between the groups. So these LAMAs are actually comparable between them, but few LAMAs have lesser side effects, and that makes them better for our patients. Now the big question, whether triple or dual, which should be used first? So for the triple combinations, we have two studies which combine the glycoformo together. These are the ethos and chronos study. In ethos, they have compared these ethos chronos, both they compared the budesonide, glycopyrronium, formoterol versus glycopyrronium, formoterol versus formoterol, budesonide. So 3 arms are there in both ethos and chronos. And we have few other studies which, apart from the glycoformo, has few other drugs which they compared, like the Trinity, Trilogy, and Tribute. But the basic conclusion from all these trials are that triple therapy reduced exacerbation rates more in severe COPD groups who are at risk of exacerbation with increased risk of pneumonia. So this is true that in severe COPD groups, especially with eosinophilia, this triple therapy has done better, but dual bronchodilation is probably the choice in rest of the patients. And we often use this triple therapy in our day-to-day clinical practice. The spiromic data have shown that prevalence of inhaled corticosteroid use in GOLD 1 was 22%, in GOLD 2 it was 39%, and even if the CAT score is less than 10, 46% were given ICS in COPD, and when the CAT score was 10, it was given in 67% of the patients. And 32% of all patients with a diagnosis of COPD in primary care end up with triple therapy within 1 year of diagnosis, and this is often unnecessary. So when we should use the triple therapy? So we should use the triple therapy if there is 2 or more moderate exacerbations in last 1 year, or 1 severe exacerbation in last 1 year, especially with the peripheral eosinophil count more than 300 cells per microliter. And we may consider triple therapy if the peripheral eosinophil count between 100 to 300, patient discharged from hospital after acute exacerbation of COPD, because it is often said that COPD exacerbation cluster together. And if you have 1 exacerbation, there is high chance patient will get another exacerbation within 8 weeks. So any discharge COPD patient should be discharged with a triple therapy. And when there is a significant lung function decline, that means the FEV1 decline is more than 60 ml per year, then we should go for a triple therapy, or we may consider triple therapy. and where triple therapy should not be prescribed. If the patient have a very low symptoms, if there is no airflow limitation, but with symptoms, that means the PRISM group, preserved ratio impaired spirometry group. So these are the early COPD group. You have pre-COPD, you have early clinical COPD. In these groups, triple therapy is not recommended. If the patient does not have any history of exacerbation in the previous 1 year, we should stop the inhaled corticosteroid. And there is now an ERS guideline of stopping inhaled corticosteroid, how it should be stopped. There is a guideline on that. Peripheral eosinophil count less than 100. These patients are have very high risk of pneumonia. We should stop using inhaled corticosteroids in them. Extreme cautious use in case of bronchiectasis, tuberculosis, or non-tubercular mycobacterial infections, which is very common in our country. Extreme cautious use or no use in HIV treated with antiretroviral therapy. Only beclomethasone is indicated here. And presence of comorbidities, that means if the patient have heart disease or any other comorbidities, that should not influence the use of triple therapy. These are the gold recommendations. We all know about that. The green portion is a strong support and the red portion is against use. I'm not going in detail of it. And we should select our therapy based on the trait of the patient, whether the patient is having a dyspnea trait or exacerbation trait. If the patient is having an dyspnea trait, always a LAMA combination is the better one than the exacerbation trait. If the patient is having a very high eosinophil count or eosinophil between 100 to 300, we may consider the inhaled corticosteroid in addition to the LABA and LAMA. So to conclude, dual bronchodilation with LAMA and LABA is the default treatment of most of the COPD patients we encounter in our clinical practice. And the class effect of these different kind of LAMAs are more or less similar, but glycopyrronium is known to have definitely lesser side effects than tiotropium, and ease of use, cost, and patient preference should be considered while selecting the inhalation therapy. And before I say thank you, I like to invite all the delegates who are attending this today's CME to Calcutta in December 16 to 18, where we're going to organize this Calcutta sleep course. And I take this opportunity to invite you all. And this will be a great academic feast on sleep. And we have some very good national, international speakers. Please join there. And thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Arup, for that fantastic presentation. And it said, "Ek se bhale do, do se bhale teen," and more the merrier. You did speak about triple drug therapy when it comes to COPD particular phenotype. So whenever you have more of exacerbation, when you have more of asthma COPD overlap, when your patients have eosinophil counts of 100 to 300, probably these are the patients who are going to be benefited with triple drug therapy. But trust me, most of your COPD patients otherwise would do equally good on dual bronchodilator therapy, is what is the understanding emerging. And whenever you have more of exacerbation tail, whenever these patients are symptomatic, in spite of being them on dual bronchodilator, third drug, that is steroid, is chosen. And the whole game is now moving from whether you give inhaled corticosteroids and beta agonists in one inhaler and give anticholinergic separate, or you put them on dual bronchodilator, give inhaled corticosteroids separate. It's probably what we're going to learn over the next decade or so. Thank you very much. And then we move on to the last speaker for the day, and that is Dr. Rahul Sharma. Rahul Bhai is going to be talking on holistic approach in management of obstructive airway disease. He's going to talk beyond test, beyond drugs. And Rahul Bhai is MD DNB, internal medicine, and then he went on to do his DM, pulmonary and critical care medicine, and he fetched a gold medal there. He's a fellow of American College of Chest Physicians, US, fellow of National College of Chest Physicians, India, and fellow Indian Sleep Disorder Association. I'm very happy to share with you, he's the first interventional pulmonologist in the world to use EBUS for the treatment of pericardial tapping, and a novel technique which was recognized and published in Chest US Journal. Currently, he is a teaching coordinator for DNB program and intervention fellowship program for teaching and training of DNB students. Received Young Investigators Award from ICMR in 2014, Young Investigator Award from Indian Chest Society in 2019, and has over 40 publications in indexed national and international journals. With those words, Dr. Rahul Sharma, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Agam, for the wonderful words, and good evening, everyone. Greetings from Delhi to all parts of India and abroad. Dr. John has joined us in the initial part of the meeting, and he'll be joining us again, and a wonderful insight into the molecule. So now I'll be talking about something which is not related to this molecule, but it is around the molecule when we are optimizing the care of COPD or asthma patient in our day-to-day practice. So I'll be talking about a holistic approach with a molecule, the best molecule that you choose. If you are not giving the holistic approach, it will be of less use and your patient will get less benefit. Thank you. And very important thing that my first congratulations to Lupin team for organizing such an event in which we are also learning from international speakers. And so this holistic approach starts with this. So there are guidelines to treat asthma and COPD. And we all know that despite choosing whatever molecule that we are discussing and new molecules are coming up, the treatment or the control of the disease is somehow not that optimal. And we have seen that 69% of the asthmatics feels that there is the asthma is not well controlled. And even the data showed that 80% of the COPD patients, especially when we talk about patients who has recurrent exacerbations, severe COPD patients, they have poor quality of life. And what we do, we try to increase the dose of steroid, whether it is the inhaled corticosteroid or the oral corticosteroid, whether it is a dual therapy or triple therapy. And we know the side effects that even with high dose inhaled corticosteroid, we can have all these side effects. Pneumonia is very, very common, and other side effects depending on the age and the mode of giving steroids, whether it is inhaled or oral, we do see all these side effects. And when we look into the true control of asthma per se, I'll talk about COPD also, then the severe asthma is to the tune of 3 to 7%. That is what Gina said. And when we look into the study or the reality check, we have data from abroad as well as from India. A big gap is there between patients who are not well controlled and the patients who are truly having severe asthma. Right. So when we talk about severe asthma, let's say on a higher side, the tendency is only 5 to 10%, but most of our asthma patients are not well controlled, despite the best molecule to our choice we are using to our patients. So this is again a big gap between asthma control, and same goes for COPD. So this is again a study in which they try to look into the COPD control, whether it is a mild, moderate or severe COPD. Appropriate control was seen only in 4% of the patient, and there was 0% patient in severe group who are well controlled. So what is the gap that we need to fill in? So the gap is between the education and skill enhancement. We need to give more time, and we need to look into the other aspects of management of our patients of obstructive airway disease. So let's look into the device. So again, whatever best molecule you give, device is the most important way to deliver these molecules into the lung of the patients. And this is a very, very, the very, very critical article that has shown that in the last 40 years, the inhalational technique the molecule has improved so much, but somehow the technique is only to the tune of 40%. Only 40% of the patients are able to take these molecules properly, despite whatever new molecules are coming up in the market. So it is a sad scenario that still in the modern era where we have all the digital way of improving the compliance as well as technique of the patient, the true acceptance of the devices or the true technique that people are utilizing is only 40%. And it burns a lot of money. So it is not only that the patient this is creating problem to the patient. This is the data from US which showed that whatever amount of money they are spending on COPD management, up to 20% of this is going waste because of the poor technique. And the other thing that we need to deal with is an ongoing exposure. We believe that our patients who are smoker have COPD. If they are not stop smoking, they will not improve. True. But there are n number of other factors that we need to look into. All females are not having bronchial asthma. Household exposure to the biomass fuel exposure is still a very, very common problem outside the NCR or Delhi NCR cities, outside metros. And there are n number of other factors that we need to look into try to tell them, try to avoid them, then only we'll be able to achieve the good control of obstructive airway disease in our patient. Right. The first and the foremost thing that we always tell our patient that please stop smoking, but it is not a one-time game. Every time you need to encourage your patient to stop smoking. Wherever the patient is having symptoms, that is probably the best time when you tell your patient that this smoking is doing harm. Otherwise, the drugs that you are taking is very good. And there are n number of ways to tackle these things. There are pharmacotherapy, counseling sessions, group counseling sessions. All need these things you need to take into account where your COPD patient is not doing good and you are jumping onto triple therapy. Avoidance of occupational exposure, again, a grade A evidence. If you feel that your patient is not improving, you need to look into the surrounding of the patient, whether the patient is having any constant exposure which is creating symptoms to your patient, or be it your COPD patient, look into the occupation of the patient, whether the patient is having good days at home during holidays or good days during the work. So you need to look into both the aspect, whether the home has any kind of dampness, dust, pets, all these things can create or, is a constant source of exposure to your asthma patient. Same goes to the patients who are going to the occupation, concrete, construction, stone crushing. All these things are again very, very important when you are giving a holistic approach to your patient. And the holistic approach, again, you need to look beyond the lung, because both the disease, whether you talk about asthma or COPD, has associated comorbidities. Until and unless you treat these comorbidities, your asthma or COPD will never be well controlled. So this is again very, very important. When your patient is not doing well and you are giving the best molecule as per your choice, you need to look beyond, look into the device, look into the surrounding, and look into the comorbidities which is there with the patient, and you are not optimizing these comorbidities. This is again a very, very important and simple slide, that once your patient has any kind of breathlessness which is not improving, it creates a fear in the mind of the patient. Patients start doing less activities. This less activity creates more deconditioning. More deconditioning causes more symptoms. And this vicious cycle patients stuck in. And you need to break this cycle by simply asking your patient to do exercise. If the patient is too sick or you believe that the patient is not able to do unsupervised exercise, please enroll your patient into pulmonary rehabilitation program. Physical activity is recommended to all of us, whether we are healthy or we have some kind of disease, but it has a maximum benefit in patients who are having respiratory diseases. So this is again grade A evidence that all of your patients, you should encourage and enroll into any kind of exercise activity or pulmonary rehabilitation. Diet again is very, very important. Most of us are, so as far as the diet goes, most of us are consuming more carbs as compared to proteins. But for these patients, they are losing weight because of the systemic inflammation, constant cough. So these are the patients in which you need to modify their diet also. Gaining weight doesn't serve the purpose. Gaining a fruitful weight in terms of muscles is very, very important to understand. Breathing exercise, we have a simple device in cases of patient who has associated bronchitis or bronchitis, where this secretion pooling is creating more exacerbation in these patients. Rather than giving them any new drug, giving them a simple device, OPEP device will help them a lot and decreases their exacerbation significantly. So non-pharmacological management is almost same, whether we talk about asthma or COPD, smoking cessation and physical activity. And another component which has taken a huge leap post-COVID era is the vaccination. So all these patients should be encouraged to take flu vaccination shots, pneumococcal vaccination, and now pertussis vaccination has also been recommended for COPD patient. And COVID, we all know that we all are worried about COVID. So all our patients has COVID vaccination, but still 90% of our patients are not aware about flu vaccination and pneumococcal vaccination, and 90% of the physicians are not aware about this pertussis vaccination that has to be given to our COPD patients. So once you have, ruled out all these things, optimize all these things, still there are some subset of patients which are not doing well. So these are some COPD which is truly severe, and there are n number of options which is non-surgical or minimally invasive in terms of bronchoscopic lung volume reduction. So out of all these wall plugs, coils or bio-LVR, unfortunately, none of this is available to us. The things that has already come into India is thermal ablation. How does it work? It basically, uses heated vapors in the most destroyed area of the COPD lung, most of the time in the upper zones, to, to create some kind of atelectasis so that the normal lungs get enough chance. So this is the pictorial diagram. How does it work? So when you have a destroyed part of the lung, which is emphysematous, you try to decrease that volume without surgery, and the normal lungs takes advantage, and your patient is in a better advantage to breathe well. So this is how it works, that if you have an upper lobe disease, you can just ablate that with the help of vapors, and the other normal lung takes the space and it will work better. So these are some of the new therapies which are available for the patient, although none of the therapy is without side effect, whether you talk about drug therapy or valve therapy or any kind of intervention therapy, but you need to choose your patient rightly so that you give more benefit as compared to side effect to your patients. We have the options of lung transplant also in India now for all the terminally ill or sick patient where we are not able to do any kind of interventions. These patients are having recurrent exacerbations, poor lung functions. So there are criteria which has been given for referral for lung transplant and referral for listing. So this is again very, very important to understand that giving triple therapy and your patient is not responding is not the end for the management of your patient. You can do a lot more things other than just providing pharmacological therapy to your patient. Same goes for severe asthma. We have wonderful molecules now. And I tell you that you need to use these molecules to believe it, that how wonderfully these molecules work in your patient. When you phenotype your patients into one of the category, whether it is eosinophilic, IgE mediated, which broadly comes into the category of TH2 and TH1. And these patient works wonderfully with these molecules. So I'll tell you a story that one of my patient who has recurrent exacerbation lung function to the tune of 30%, we have started that patient on benralizumab. The first answer that he has given after 4 months, that I am able to lift the shutter of my shop, which is a very big thing for such patients, because he was not able to walk even 10 steps. So this is how these therapies works, and you need to identify these patients and give them the benefit over and above your triple therapy or LABA-ICS combination. But before jumping onto these therapies, we were discussing before with Dr. John also, that you need to identify all these factors, whether your asthma is well confirmed, compliance is good, aggravation factor you have taken care of, comorbidities is well controlled, adequate treatment has been given, and then you go into this phenotypic approach and try to go for these expensive therapy for your patient. Still, this molecule we have talked about in the evening, Formoterol Fluticasone, and it gives all the indication this is probably one of the molecule that we can incorporate into our daily physician practice or daily practice in optimizing our patients. So my understanding or my discussion with Mr. John, so what I have understand that if your patient is not doing well, whether it is bronchial asthma or COPD, rather than jumping onto the higher category, changing the molecule might work for your patient, although it is still, there is no head-on trial to change the molecule and see whether these molecule works better or not. And lupin is also doing some wonderful job. So it is not like that we are sitting in the clinic, we want a dietitian with us, we want a physiotherapist with us, we want a yoga teacher with us, we want a trainer with us who will teach our patient. Lupin is doing this wonderful job to us, and they are providing these services digitally in terms of digital asthma educator, which online teaches the patients. You just give this number. This digital educator are there. The patient has to give just missed call. They'll call back and teaches all these things to the patient. Pulmonary physiotherapy session can be arranged for these patients on your prescription and your signatures. Yoga sessions are there. There are people who don't want to do, exercises. They are more preferably, like the term yoga versus exercise. So this option is also been given. Diet plan you can always advise to your patient, irrespective of whatever molecule you are giving. Jay is doing everything to you. So you just have to give this number to your patient. Patient has to give a missed call. And all these things can be very well maintained on digital platform, whether the patient needs any kind of home spirometry that can also be provided. And medical adherence benefit is always there. And your patient is very, very happy when these services are provided free of cost to your patient. So this is again very, very important to understand I think Dr. John will again join us for all questions that you have in your mind, and please feel free to ask any kind of question, because very limited times we need to get such kind of experience from the international speaker. Thank you very much for your patient listening. So I'll hand it over back to Dr. Agam. And if you have any question from Delhi, I'll be very, very happy to convey these questions to Dr. Agam and Dr. John. Any question from any one of you?
And question.
So if none of you have any question, I have a question to Dr. John. So we were talking about, Dr. John, can you listen? Can you hear us? Yeah.
Yes, you can.
So as we were talking about all these molecules, and we find that there are multiple benefits of these molecules, I was given this task of providing non-pharmacological management of these patients. And to India, Lupin is doing a wonderful job by providing digitally these services to the patients. So how about in your country? How are you providing these services to your patients, especially considering this COVID era?
So there's been a huge development in both electronic support for patients, but also in terms of remote consultations, not only in respiratory disease and but in other conditions as well. So many hospital appointments are still currently being performed online rather than in person. And to some extent, it's possible to conduct a respiratory consultation online. The only thing that falls down is around inhaler technique, where patients tell us it's much easier to do it with somebody in place rather than online. And this comes to sort of learning skills. You know, for instance, I'll see you next week, or I'll hear from you, or I'll keep in touch with you, describes my predilection for seeing something done, hearing something done, or doing it with my hands, touching. And as far as inhaler techniques concerned, being able to hold and handle a device is really important. There's also a number of apps and support groups now, actually too many to mention, and I think too many can sometimes be the problem. We've actually got so many opportunities that we don't really know where the best place to take people is. There's so many offers of support that it's become confusing for patients to know where they can get the best advice. And of course, you can sometimes get wrong advice by inadvisably going online and taking information.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. That was nice presentation, and I would now request all 4 locations. Would you come up here?
So John, you can continue in the meantime.
Sorry. Okay. So that was not, mic was not on. Fine. We move on to the panel discussion, and I believe, are you there? Everybody, all 4 locations? Are you there, Rajesh?
Hello, Cochin Center.
Cochin, are you there, Rajesh? And Avia is here with me. Arup, are you there at Kolkata?
Agam sir, no, nothing from Cochin, sir. Thanks a lot, Dr. John, for that excellent words, and Agam sir, as usual.
Didn't get you. What was that?
No questions from Cochin, sir.
But where are you? I can't see you on screen. Oh, you're there. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I can see here. Oh, hi. So I must apologize, Rajesh bhai. When you were giving a talk, I was in traffic and I couldn't connect that time, so I missed listening to you. But when I put your name on Google, and when I tried to look at asthma in you, in two studies flash immediately. I didn't do anything. Okay, two studies flash immediately on screen, and one is your study on, you looked at the perception of patients on asthma, and then recently you have spoken about the combination therapy where you did the meta-analysis. Would you speak a bit about that? I'm sure you would have covered that in the discussion, but I want to hear it from your mouth again.
Yeah, am I visible and audible, sir?
Yes, you're very much visible, very much audible.
Sir. Thanks a lot for highlighting that, sir. In fact, the asthma omalizumab study was actually the patient perspectives and the real world evidence of omalizumab in our own set of patients. So
it was what, art time something, right? What was that? Artwork, correct.
Acceptance and results of therapy with omalizumab in real world Kerala settings. So that was the full form. In fact, there are a few eye openers from that, because we looked at 560 uncontrolled asthmatics over 3 years. And of that, only 15% of patients were actually severe asthmatics. Most of the patients had simple modifiable factors like incorrect inhaler technique and non-adherence and all those things. And of those who had real asthma, real severe asthma, only 1/3 of them took biologicals, although all of them were eligible for that. So again, there is a scope for under-treatment as well as over-treatment with biologicals, because if we treat all the uncontrolled asthmatics without looking into all those things, that will be over-treatment, whereas we are actually not able to pass on the benefit of biologicals to all patients who are deserving it. So that was this one. And the second one was the FF meta-analysis, systematic review and meta-analysis, where one thing which actually I mentioned it in my lecture, the real world study by Dr. Davis Price and all, on almost 40,000 patients with asthma on various ICS lavas, said that the lowest risk of pneumonia is with FF as compared to SF, FB, various DPIs, MDIs, all those things. So that was one thing that we could bring out from this systematic review.
So whenever it comes to pneumonias, infections, we tend to label steroids as responsible, and whenever there are exacerbation, guidelines say use more of steroids. I find it very difficult to understand. What do we do?
I think that the magnitude of pneumonia is a bit, it's a hype. There is definitely a risk of increased pneumonia, but that's to the tune of it's a very small number. So I don't think we should just be concerned about pneumonia and deny the benefit of ICS to patients who really receive it.
Absolutely. So if I have to give one message at the end of this discussion we had, is don't worry about or don't fear the development of pneumonia. If your patient deserves steroid in the treatment arm, go ahead and give them this treatment. Most of the studies which were looked upon, I mean, they did not really look at it from pneumonia perspective. They looked at just any infective exacerbation and label it to steroid. Avya, your views on it? Would you? Can I have a mic there for him? Would you agree to what I said? Do you really see in your practice that patients getting more pneumonia because of inhaled steroids?
No, sir. I don't think so. Patients get more pneumonia because of inhaled steroids. In fact, that's like Dr. Rajesh said, it's an overhyped thing.
Absolutely.
Probably would have seen maybe one patient in the last 7-8 years getting pneumonia. That too, we don't know whether it was a community-acquired pneumonia which was caused by improper inhalation technique, or there were multiple confounding factors. Patient was a diabetic as well. I don't see. The whole point of reducing the risk of pneumonia depends on teaching the patient how to use the inhaler, gargling after using the inhaler, taking care of all the other comorbidities, rather than just blaming on the inhaled corticosteroid that this is the what causes pneumonia. There is nothing else wrong with the patient, and blame the ICS, and then we get scared for using the ICS. And then eventually the patients have got this whole stigma regarding ICS, who will be on long-term steroids. So I think that's where our counseling is very, very important, that the dose of the inhaled corticosteroids in microgram, the amount of absorption will be less than 10%. So for example, if you take 125 mics, you probably have to take it for 150 days for you to reach 1 mg of a oral tablet equivalence. So that kind of reassurance is also required from our side.
Fine. So by and large, pneumonia is not much of a problem.
So I think,
that's what. Yes.
I'm Dr. Rahul. So I think
Yes,
a
Rahul.
subset of patient where you need to be little careful is patients who are having recurrent exacerbations, in which I think I am very, very skeptical whether the high dose steroids are doing these pneumonias in these patients. And most of these patients has some kind of underlying bronchitis or bronchiectasis, which is probably related to the pooling of secretion, which is creating recurrent exacerbation in these patients. So looking beyond these inhaled corticosteroid therapy, because every time the patient is coming to us, we need to or have to give IV or oral corticosteroid to these patients. Involving these patients into pulmonary rehabilitation program, giving them good bronchial hygiene, probably do the job.
That point very well taken. But I'm sure you also showed in your slide that when patient is getting discharged, that is the time you would want them to be on triple therapy. These patients are admitted for infection, right? This patient has got infective exacerbation that time. So you can't deprive them of steroid. That's what I wanted to understand.
So absolutely, I think you cannot deprive these patients. Once the patient has exacerbation, I think you need to have to give these patients on inhaled corticosteroid. But patients who are having recurrent exacerbation, you need to look into that. Is the inhaled corticosteroid is the culprit, or there is other factors which are contributing to their pneumonias?
Okay, get your point. And Arup bhai, what do you feel? What does Kolkata feel about inhaled corticosteroid? Yes.
I'm audible, I think. So I think that in COPD, as the definition of exacerbation is still not very much precise. So the use of inhaled corticosteroid or the LABA/LAMA, which should be used, that is not still very much precisely defined. I think we should define these patients, which patients are going to respond to these inhaled corticosteroids and which patient is going to respond to these LABA/LAMA combinations.
And
pardon?
How do you do that?
Yeah, so that is the definition of exacerbation is still not precise. So what the gold says
not
actually.
Happy with exacerbation definition. I think I'm quite convinced with this definition. Whenever
No, but I'm not convinced. There is no time frame. There is no. This is just a subjective definition. So from the definition, you cannot judge that whether this patient is having an infective exacerbations or this is just the inflammation of the or inflammatory burden of the disease which has increased. So it becomes very difficult, and you have to take individual decisions based on the clinical phenotype of the patient.
Okay, get your point. But trust me, whatever exacerbation would require antibiotics, and I don't think anybody here would have enough guts, enough strength to not treat any exacerbation with antibiotics. Am I correct? Anybody having any different opinion in the house here in front of me, Mumbai? Everybody is in tired mode, it seems. So Dr. John, I would want your views on it. So now there is kind of a bit of difference of opinion here amongst four corners of India. What do you think? Would you deprive these patients of inhaled corticosteroid if your patient gets recurrent exacerbation? Because exactly that is the cohort I'm looking at, putting them on steroids.
So the comment, I think, I don't see who it was from. The comment around does a patient have bronchiectasis raises a different issue altogether. So if we think a patient has got bronchiectasis, then we have to consider the management of bronchiectasis, for which steroids might not be important. But I'm quite convinced that patients who have eosinophilia and exacerbations or asthma symptoms with COPD should be on an inhaled corticosteroid and probably triple therapy. So I agree entirely that those patients shouldn't be deprived of it. I think it's very interesting, the comment from Kolkata about the difference between an inflammatory exacerbation and an infective exacerbation. And there was some work presented at the European Respiratory Society 2 weeks ago that suggested that we should maybe be considering oral corticosteroid at the time of COPD exacerbation, again, based on the eosinophil count. And the thinking behind that was, if the patient doesn't have a raised eosinophil count, the oral corticosteroid won't help and therefore shouldn't be given because it might cause more harm than good. So we're quite right to try and dissect the different types of subjective assessment of COPD exacerbations. But at the end of the day, the balance of probabilities is going to be that triple therapy is going to be more useful than harmful for that group of patients.
Okay, so if I get it right, I think during exacerbation, you would definitely treat them with steroid. But when they stabilize, as probably, is mentioned in the guidelines, you could think of de-escalating them. And when the exacerbation is over, you can actually maintain them a dual bronchodilator withdrawing steroids, as was shown in the slides earlier.
No, I don't think so. If a patient has more than one exacerbation, then in my opinion, they're going to be on some inhaled corticosteroid compound for a prolonged period of time. And I agree with the comment about the pneumonia exacerbation risk in patients who require an inhaled steroid, and some don't. Some patients will do perfectly well on LAMA-LABA combination. They don't need a steroid, ones with low eosinophil counts, without exacerbations, without asthma tendency. But the risk of pneumonia is a few percent, 1, 2, 3, 4%. The risk of exacerbation in most patients, well, it's 0.8 a year, so that's 80%. So the risk benefit is going to be very much in favor of giving the steroid rather than withholding it.
Great. Fair enough. So I think the debate is over. And we move on to the next question. Again, I am going to ask you that question, Dr. John. Have you seen this? You mentioned in your presentation that in a very rough manner, all those patients who were on otherwise combination were switched over to Formoterol Fluticasone and they did better. What is your personal experience? Have you done that kind of changeover from the other combination therapies to Formoterol Fluticasone? And if you did so, did you find any appreciable difference in their asthma control?
Well, I haven't done it in 2,800 patients, that's for sure. But it comes back to the discussion I had in the question time earlier about if a patient is not doing well, what do you do? And the answer to that is you look at their compliance, you look at their inhaler technique, and there is often a necessity if you're changing device to change therapy as well. So I've certainly got experience of switching patients from other ICS LABAs to fluticasone formoterol with some benefit. But equally, I've also had benefits from switching people from other combinations to other combinations and doing well as well. So I think it's, as my theme is, this is another club in the bag. This is another opportunity and something else that we can think about doing. So yes, I've seen benefit, but this is not exclusively to this drug combination. Device is very important as well, but you can't leave an uncontrolled patient. You've got to do something, and changing the drug is one of the options.
Okay, and the same question goes to Dr. Rajesh there. Do you think this Formoterol Fluticasone is your preferred combination in managing asthma? Suppose a new patient walks into your cabin, your preferred ICS, preferred LABA combination. Do you think it's going to be Formoterol Fluticasone, and if so, why?
Yes, sir. In fact, I am a very huge fan of FF. Now, the reasons that I think of when I choose FF for my asthmatic patient is that you have a controller with a reliever that is having a very short onset of action. Okay, you can always debate that FB is also same that way, but then vis-a-vis FB, I always feel that fluticasone is a more potent, topically potent ICS. So for that reason, my first choice becomes FF. In addition to that, with my pneumonia risk, so it has the lowest pneumonia risk. It is reasonably affordable for the Indian category of patients, not that exorbitantly costly. Correct. So for these reasons, in asthmatics, given the choice, I always prefer FF as an upfront choice. Having said that, I was just discussing with some of my, mates in Cochin, and there were some concerns on FF. The main concerns that were raised was, one is that a lot of tachycardia with FF, for that matter, formoterol. So in someone who is experiencing tachycardia, probably I will come back to budesonide. That's one. And in pregnancy, definitely budesonide is something that is much more approved and safe. So in that particular category of asthmatics, I probably prefer FB, formoterol budesonide. Otherwise, my upfront choice is FF in most of my asthmatics.
Great. And your statement holds true even when we have newer molecules like Vilantrol available?
Sir, I am a very hardcore fan of MDA with spacer. So, fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't got that confused because both intercateral mometasone as well as Vilantrol Fluticasone as of now are available in a DPI formulation. Yes, DPI is probably the order of the day when it goes in the coming years because of all those environmental concerns and all those things. So probably I will have to change myself and start believing in DPI much more, and probably once that happens and I start off trying with all these newer combinations, I might change, I don't know. But as of now, FF seems to be a very, very rosy thing for me.
I remember when I was a student and I just started, trying those inhalers my way, I was told that when it is asthma, you can give DPIs. When it is COPD, give only MDIs with spacer. But then with newer understanding, newer advantages, with betterment in the devices and with better studies which talking about good delivery, even at lower inspiratory flow rates, I think those concepts are changing. Do I ask Rahul bhai, your views on it? What do you feel? Do you still go with MDI spacer when it comes to COPD, as I was taught in my post-graduations, and you reserve DPI only for asthmatics, or you would give them the chance of choosing device, you put the whole bucket in front of them and give them the option of choosing their device? What do you do in your practice?
So not the whole bucket, but I think there are something that we need to decide mutually in terms of understanding of the patient regarding the device. So this is very, very important aspect, that patient has to understand their disease as well as device. And we should be sure, because most of the time, and the research has also shown that patients are always overconfident, whether you talk about DPIs, MDIs with spacer, and none of these devices foolproof. So it is basically like, for instance, for females who are working, carrying this inhaler with a spacer is a difficult task. So they never prefer MDI with spacers. So it is not a one-way identification or one way of treatment. You need to look into the various aspects other than molecule to decide whether your patient will accept this or not. This is very, very important.
See, I attended, those early days European Respiratory Congress, and I was very much fascinated when this chest physicians there would have a respiratory therapist. There are beautiful ladies, there, and they would talk to patients about the choice of devices, and they would put the entire bucket in front of them. And I thought I would also do that. Of course, I did not get any beautiful receptionist or beautiful lady to talk about it. I hired a boy who was my technician and trained him with this. We spent about next 2 months in doing that. So whenever a patient would come, once you decide about putting them on aerosol therapy, you would put the entire bucket in front of them and discuss out. At the end of 15-20 minutes, that patient would come to you and ask me, "But sir, tame kyon nahi kayu levanu?" The only question would be, "Doctor, you tell me what devices should I take, which is the best for me?" And I found the whole exercise fruitless, useless. Avya, your views on it? I'm not talking about that beautiful lady receptionist. I'm talking about her.
So my views are very much with Rajesh sir, that I'm a very strong MDI spacer person, for the simple reason, for the lack of complications, oropharyngeal candidiasis, voice change, and slightly better drug deposition. Also, we can use it in exacerbations. The age of the patient is something I really take into consideration. Probably someone in their 20s, 30s, I may be tempted to give DPI as an option, but for extremes of ages, it's a no-brainer. An MDI with a spacer device is the way to go forward. And yes, with the new the emission guidelines and the HFAs being probably being banned in the coming years, we'll have to switch. But I'm also hopeful we'll get better DPI devices by then, which will be comparable to the MDI with spacers.
And Dr. Haldar, what does Kolkata feel?
Yes. Definitely the peak inspiratory flow rate is one of the determinant whether we should go for an MDI or DPI. But apart from that, there's not few new studies are there which are showing that the fine particle fraction of the MDI which goes into the periphery of the lung is more than the DPI if the patient doesn't have sufficient or in the lower rate of inspiratory flow rate. So perhaps with the impulse oscillometry showing more of the peripheral involvement, and my question to all the panelists here also, that do you feel that if you have a more peripheral involvement, we should go for MDR with spacer than that of DPI.
That sounds quite logical to practice, but then if anybody has any difference of opinion?
I agree completely.
Yes.
For small airway diseases and peripheral deposition, we must go ahead with an MDI with a spacer. Absolutely.
Great. So by and large, the trend moves more over MDI with spacer, and I buy this point. So at the extremes of age, what Avya says makes sense to put them on MDI with spacer, and younger adults could be given choice of choosing their device. Dr. Sharma, Rajesh Bhai did mention about in his study about the meta-analysis that he published, and there are recent evidences which say that yes, Formoterol Fluticasone can be preferred as first-line therapy because of its superior efficacy. What's your opinion, Dr. Sharma?
I think by all means, if you go by the pharmacological property of this molecule, it looks best. But I think in practice, we need to use more and more this molecule and decide accordingly. But till now, I think as Dr. John has also suggested that patients who are not doing well on formoterol budesonide combination, we can switch them to this molecule, and upfront we can start this molecule. This molecule has all the qualities so far to start as to start this molecule as upfront or a first line molecule.
Let me stop you there and ask you, if your patient is not doing well on formoterol budesonide, would you change him to formoterol fluticasone, or would you change him to salmeterol fluticasone?
I think Formoterol Fluticasone is a better choice in terms of short acting and quick action and long lasting effect as compared to salmeterol and fluticasone.
Do you really think it makes difference in practice when your patient is supposed to take inhaler regularly, a 12-hour gap?
So it does make a difference when the patient is taking it in between as breakthrough, because most of these patients who are taking it and coming to you as a follow-up in unscheduled visit, most of these patients have these symptoms, and these are not taking as per 12-hour doses, but in between also they are taking either Asthalin or some kind of short-acting drug.
Okay, we move on to Dr. Bansal. Avya, what do you feel with the available data? Are you confident enough to initiate this kind of combinations for your uncontrolled asthmatics? Uncontrolled, I would say, is coming to you for the first time. Say a suspected severe asthmatic who come to you. Are you confident to initiate this kind of therapy to them?
Unfortunately,
so when you choose your first beta agonist and your first steroid, can this be your combination?
It is my combination. Unfortunately, being in a tertiary care hospital, we get referred patients most of the time. So as long as the patient is above 12 years of age, I'll be very, very happy to put each and every one on FF. It's a no-brainer for me.
Great.
Above 12 years, because there's not enough data to say we can see if we use fluticasone.
So, Dr. Rajesh, you seem to be discussing something. You want to add something to the discussion that is going on here? I'm keeping an eye on you, huh?
Nothing major, sir. Nothing major.
No, then what made you laugh? You're correcting some jokes there. We also want to know that.
No, that's not
That's some secret
FF,
jokes.
so,
Do we connect after the meeting?
Not wicked. We are not wicked at all.
So I think we can take this opinion from Dr. John also, that there are patients in which you don't want to start formoterol fluticasone upfront. Is there any subset of patient you consider that the other molecule do better than this?
I think Dr. John did answer that, but Dr. John, that's a good question. If I think I asked you that question in the initial discussion, but would you want?
I don't think there is a demographic that we can say that one ICS lab will be better than the other. I don't think we can pick out a group of patients. I want to come back briefly to the switching. The easiest switch physicians should consider is from fluticasone salmeterol to fluticasone formoterol. And I think many of us will agree that that's a common sense opportunity. So perhaps if we're trying to start somewhere, that should be the group that we should look at to look for additional benefit when they're not well controlled on the fluticasone salmeterol.
Okay. Let's move on from asthma to COPD. And Dr. Haldar, I have a question for you in this COPD segment is, have you started putting your patients on combination of LABA/LAMA with glyco and formoterol? And is it your first line choice when it comes to COPD, dual bronchodilation?
Yes, definitely. The dual bronchodilation, so most of the patients we encounter in our day-to-day practice either belongs to a group B or group D. So we hardly get group A or group C patients. So in most of them, definitely we'll go for a dual bronchodilation. And given the glycopyrronium has lesser side effects, though still it is anecdotal, I will definitely prefer glycopyrronium over my tiotropium if the pocket permits.
So you mean to say it's the time for tiotropium to pack their bags and go away?
No, definitely. There's patient preference is also there.
Patient won't prefer. Patient won't tell you, no, give me tiotropium over glycopyrrolate. So what are the patients you would consider?
There is some
as of now for
inter-individual variability of the side effects of different kind of lamas also. We are learning that. So that
your
is
initial
also
choice. Would there be anybody among the house here or anywhere who would consider tiotropium as first anticholinergic drug? Anybody there? This is stuck. No, it's moving. So I take the answer as no. No, I'm okay. So by and large, when you're initiating treatment, I think glycopyrronium has become the choice of anticholinergic drug. We move on to next question to yes, Dr. Rajesh, I want you to answer this question. Now we've had enough discussion on not using much steroid in COPD patient. So what would be your take on when would you use ICS LABA combination in COPD patient? Because if you really look at the way guideline moves, by then you will have your patients on LABA and LAMA combination. So you will have your patient probably on Formoterol and glycopyrronium combination. When would it be time when you would consider these patients on Formoterol and Fluticasone like this in COPD category?
Sir, if I can just come out of research and look at hardcore realities, most of the COPD patients who come to us regularly are by default severe COPD patients. They would have a huge symptom burden or frequent exacerbations or very poor lung function. So if there are no major contraindications for ICS, then these are the category of COPD patients where ICS is indicated. So if I actually did a very small survey of my OPD, COPD patients to see how many of them really qualify for triple therapy. And in fact, of around 200 patients whom I had just collected data, more than 80% of them were actually qualifying for triple therapy.
Correct.
So that is the category of COPD patients who are coming to tertiary care corporate hospitals, where whether this will replicate in community level, I am not very sure.
So I'm jealous when you give me data of about 560 patients of uncontrolled asthma, and when you give me data of 200 patients of COPD, which you just recently offered collected, I really get jealous of the number of patients that you end up managing.
No, sir. I think Mumbai and Kerala are that way different.
So Mumbai, we spend time on just traveling. As you know, I spend 3 hours just in traveling from one place to another. So we don't have time to see patients here.
That is there, sir. But then those
560 patients, pack my bags from here and travel to Kochi.
That 560 patients of asthma was collected over 3 years, sir, 2017 to 2019.
I'm just pulling your leg. Come on, I understand. No. I mean, in the extension of that same question, tell me, how many are you tempted to put these patients on triple drug therapy to begin with? Or if you have choice, would you give them ICS LABA in one inhaler and a separate anticholinergic? Or you would give dual bronchodilator in one inhaler and a separate steroid? How would you go about it?
As of now, sir, with the availability of triple in a single inhaler, I am obviously tempted to use that, although I have not used that on a very large extent. Why I am tempted to use that is lesser number of inhalers means lesser confusions, lesser number of devices means more adherence. So for that reason, if we have a triple drug in a single inhaler, that's always scores better. Having said that, up to the availability of these triple inhalers, my routine was an ICS LABA with a LAMA. And your previous question regarding tiotropium, I would still have a soft corner for tiotropium because that is something that has been really time tested. plus OD molecule. Yes, glycopyridine also can be used as an OD molecule, but then there are many studies which use it as a BD molecule also. So, up to now, my practice was ICS LABA plus a LAMA, usually tiotropium for those severe COPD patients.
Correct. And if I take liberty in saying that in absence of very good spirometry and whatever little experience of not in hundreds or thousands patients you see, but those few number of patients that we end up seeing in Mumbai, I think a lot of these patients are asthma COPD overlap. And when this situation turns up, it is always wiser to treat them with inhaled corticosteroids. And my practice also has been to give them LABA and steroid in one inhaler and give a separate anticholinergic drug. I mean, of course, in time, this practices would change. Avya, let me ask you the next question about the strength, the dose of Formoterol, the dose of Fluticasone, and for that matter, the dose of glycopyrronium. How would you initiate this therapy and how would you escalate these therapies? So would you do you believe in hit hard and then go down, or do you believe in go slow and then step up if required? How do you do this?
It ultimately depends on whether the patient is an asthmatic or a COPD. So let's assume we're talking about an asthmatic patient. The obvious choice would be FF combination in these patients, and you've got a step 3, step 4 coming to you. You can ideally start him with 125 mics, 2 puffs twice a day, or 1 puff twice a day, depending whether it's a step 3 or a step 4. I would in asthmatics go as high as 125, 2 puffs twice a day. That would become about 500 micrograms a day.
Correct.
If I need to go above that, I would prefer adding a LAMA rather than going up on the steroids. And at that point, I would reassess the patient if I've missed onto something or if there's any other factor. When we come to the COPD aspect, I would be far careful with the dose of the steroid. I would not go above 125 mics twice a day. That would be 250. That would be my threshold.
Max Fluticasone, correct.
Yes, that would be my threshold.
And what about Formoterol?
Up to 24.
You could go.
Up to 24, yes.
Anybody? Any difference of opinion? Dr. Haldar?
No, absolutely correct.
Okay.
No difference of opinion.
Fine. Then let me ask you next question. Would you agree that we all are underdiagnosing our obstructive airway disease patients, be it asthma, be it COPD? What do you think can be done to improve the diagnosis of obstructive airway disease? You think better spirometries are needed? You think there are newer tests? We could take help of pheno or oscillometry to diagnose more of asthma. We could take more of radiology into account when to diagnose COPD, or any other views on that? How would you improve the diagnosis of obstructive airway disease? Dr. Haldar, that is for you.
Oh, sorry. So definitely, yeah. So definitely we are under diagnosing these obstructive airway diseases in our country. And we are having the highest number of asthma patients in the world and second highest number of COPD patients in the world. But I think this is just a tip of the iceberg. And in our country also, we have different types of COPD. We have TE-COPD or tobacco associated COPD and non-smoking COPD. So that is called TOPD now.
Correct,
so different phenotypes are there in our country also. We do not know how they progress, how they exacerbate, how their lung function declines. And the choice of investigation depends on the setting, actually where you're treating your patients. Clinically, you can diagnose many patients. We are still not doing that. And if the spirometry is available, that should be widely used. And quality of spirometry also should be is a vital thing, I think, because most of the patients you will get a restrictive defect because of the poor effort. So these are the concerns of diagnosing obstructive airway disease in my country, I think.
Great, interesting. Rahul bhai, you spoke about initiative like Jai. You know, the people are becoming more and more technology friendly. All these things are available on your devices. You're sitting outside the consulting room and patients could go into those sites and get information on it. What do you think? How Jai has changed your practice? What kind of impact it made to your patients' perception about disease, compliance to treatment, their technique, improvements, etc.?
Definitely, it has helped a lot because was it my question?
Just
No, but
go
then
on.
since
Just
you
go
started,
on.
you please go on.
Okay, sorry.
I meant it for Rahul Bhai, but then yes, you could do that.
Yes, it helped me a lot. Actually, in many of the setting, we do not have this pulmonary rehab program. And whatever rehab is available over online, I think is going to help the patient a lot.
Great. And now your views, Rahul Bhai?
So I think a lot has been changed after COVID. People are more, techno friendly. They know that how to use these digital medias, and they are very, very comfortable also. So before that, if you ask anyone, or if you ask me that take a teleconsultation, it was very, very difficult and had a lot of a task. But now people are very, very acceptable to these technology. They want to, do everything from home. They don't want to come to these physiotherapy or rehabilitation center every day or alternate day. Diet advice is if it is coming free of cost, probably they are very, very happy. So all these things makes a lot of difference. I will not say that 100% of my patients or 100% of the patients are compliant to this, but whenever there is a need and you have these services available to them digitally, it makes a lot of impact.
Any disadvantages you've seen? Any drawbacks of such kind of technologies?
So the only disadvantage is that every time they ask me a consultation online only, that I'm doing everything online, so just give me a consultation online also.
So that's better in a way, no? You don't appreciate that?
It is not better.
Not really? Okay, fine. Interesting. And any other questions we have from the floor? Anybody interested in asking question, or you have?
Any of the question from Delhi side, you have any question? Any one of you?
Delhi, Kolkata, Cochin, Mumbai, of course. Okay, I think we've overshoot our time. It's what, 10:15? I'm so sorry. Before we wind up, I think I would want a take-home message from everybody. So to start with, Rajesh Bhai, would you give a take-home message on your views overall?
Yes, sir. For asthma or COPD, whatever be the inhaler, whether it is FF or FB but please use an inhaler. Take away the inhaler phobia from your mind.
Oh, great. Nice. Yes, Arup Bhai.
Yeah, so my take-home message is all asthma patient doesn't require LAMA, and all COPD patient doesn't require ICS. That should be borne in mind.
Oh, interesting. Very nice. Rahul Bhai, what does Delhi feel?
So I think I'll just replicate what Dr. John has said, that so we need to, do little better in every aspect to our patient. One, and this molecule which has come into the market again is a kind of second arrow, as he said, that we should always try these molecules, whichever is coming new and has good benefit. So doing little better makes a huge impact. That is what my take-home message and my learning from this CME.
Great. Avya Bhai.
I think pulmonary rehabilitation is the way forward. It's the future. It can significantly improve the quality of life and to a certain extent even reduce the dosage of medication. So I think all of us should enroll all our patients, irrespective of the stage of asthma or COPD, into a pulmonary rehab program.
Dr. John, we would want to take a message from you. You gave us your 3 hours. Thank you very much for that.
So I was very impressed with the take-home messages we've already seen. So do something better. Don't forget the basics. Make sure the patient's compliant. Make sure the patient can use the inhaler. I agree completely with segmenting the population to those who need a steroid and those who don't in COPD. I think that was a very good take-home message. This drug does have a place. I'm sure with clinical experience, you'll find what that is. But let's all try and do something a bit better.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Every good thing has to come to an end, and we've had fantastic 3 hours of discussion. I must thank House of Lupin for giving me this opportunity, giving me this platform, connecting us hundreds and thousands from across the country and 4 live corners of India. All those experts who took out their time and have waited till end. I can see Rajesh Bhai, everybody has left, but you are the only one sitting in the hall. So my compliments to you from Mumbai. Dr. Avya, Dr. Anup, Dr. Rahul Sharma, thank you for your time. Thank all this Mumbai team who's here, sitting quietly for 3 hours, and thank you very much. I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best to this Glycoflow F, the newer combination that you've come out with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agam sir, for moderating it so well.
For coming in time. Yeah.
Coming on time. Yeah.
So on behalf of Lupin, we once again thank entire audience, and we will take maybe a few minutes only for felicitation. We request our Lupin team to felicitate our chief moderator, Dr. Agam Vora sir. Thank you very much for making it, for traveling for 3 hours and making this meeting very enlightening for all of us, sir. I think in India, we say we need a good mentor, and sir is not good. Sir has been excellent as always, and it's a pleasure for having you, sir. Yeah. Wait. Next, we invite Dr. Avya Bansal sir on the stage and requesting Lupin team to facilitate Dr. Avya Bansal sir. Thank you, Dr. Avya Bansal sir, for your presence and excellent talk and discussions. Now we request from Kolkata team to facilitate Dr. Arup Haldar sir. Now we request our coaching team to felicitate Dr. R. Venkat sir, and also same like Delhi, Dr. Rahul Sharma sir. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh Venkat sir. It was a real pleasure to hear you and to learn from you. Excellent talk and excellent discussion points and excellent take-home message. I think once again the program has met its objective, Mentor Connect, and with all the entire mentors from all over the India and from abroad, we had a great mentorship and great learning on Formoterol and overall management of obstructive airway disease in India. Thank you. I invite Shikhar to say a few words. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, all the respected doctors. Thank you very much. Our sincere gratitude and thanks to each one of you for taking out your precious time today and being present on this auspicious event of Mentor Connect. We are blessed and fortunate to have expert insights on the topic by Dr. John Hogney. Our special thanks to all the national speakers from all the 4 locations for their interesting insights on Formoterol Fluticasone. Special thanks to Dr. Agam Vora sir for moderating the entire event and sharing his well-versed clinical expertise. We are sure that audience would have definitely benefited with your clinical expertise. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And we close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lupin team from Cochin. Thank you, Agam sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Arup Haldar sir. Thank you, Rajesh Venkat sir. Thank you, Rahul Sharma sir. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Please enjoy your dinner. Thank you. Bye.